She stepped off that train expecting a husband who'd promised her forever in careful, tender letters. What she found instead was a stranger on a porch who'd never written a single word. A man whose cold eyes held no recognition, no welcome, just confusion and the beginning of her unraveling. Meilin Zhao had crossed an ocean and half a continent carrying nothing but her mother's herbs and a heart full of fragile hope. Now that hope lay shattered at her feet in the Montana dust, and she had to decide, collapse under the weight of this betrayal, or become someone even she didn't know she could be. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Meilin's journey has traveled. Now, let me tell you how a woman with nothing but quiet strength changed an entire town. The train's whistle cut through the October air like a blade, sharp and final. Meilin pressed her palm against the cool window, watching the endless Montana landscape roll past. Golden grass bending under wind, mountains rising like ancient guardians in the distance, sky so wide it seemed to swallow the earth whole. She'd been traveling for 37 days, across the Pacific in a ship's belly where she'd been sick for 2 weeks straight. Then trains, so many trains, each one carrying her farther from everything she'd ever known and closer to a future she'd built entirely in her imagination. A future constructed from 17 letters, each one more tender than the last, each one signed Ethan Cole in a hand that slanted slightly to the right. "I'm not a man of poetry," one letter had read, "but I know what matters. Honesty, hard work, a partner who sees building a life as something sacred. If you're willing to take a chance on a Montana rancher who talks more to horses than people, I promise you won't face this frontier alone." Those words had sustained her through everything. Through her mother's death 6 months ago, when the grief had been so heavy she could barely stand. Through selling everything they'd owned, which wasn't much, to afford passage. Through nights on that ship when homesickness wrapped around her throat like hands, and she'd wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But she'd held on to those letters. Read them until the paper grew soft as cloth. Let Ethan's words paint pictures of a ranch nestled against mountains, of seasons that turned the land into a living painting, of a simple life built on something real instead of the desperate scrambling that had defined her existence in San Francisco's Chinatown, where she'd worked 16-hour days in a laundry just to survive after her mother got too sick to see patients anymore. Ethan had written about building something together, not romance. He'd been clear about that, almost apologetically so. But partnership, respect, the kind of steady companionship that deepened with shared labor and mutual purpose. She hadn't needed passion. She'd needed exactly what he offered, a place to belong. The train began to slow, brakes squealing. Meilin stood, smoothing her dress, the good one, dark blue with small flowers embroidered at the collar. Her mother's work from years ago when her hands had still been steady. She checked her reflection in the window. Delicate features, her mother used to say, but with her father's strong jaw. Eyes that had seen too much for 24 years. Hair pulled back simply, a few strands escaping around her face. She looked tired. She looked hopeful. She looked like a woman about to step into a life she'd imagined 1,000 times. The platform was weathered wood, sun-bleached and splintering. 3 people waited, an older woman with a basket, a man in work clothes who barely glanced up, and a young boy sitting on a trunk, kicking his heels against the side. No tall rancher with kind eyes. No one holding her letters, looking for a Chinese woman in a blue dress. Meilin's stomach tightened, but she stepped down carefully, accepting the conductor's hand. Her bag wasn't heavy. She'd brought almost nothing. Clothes. Her mother's medical journal, written in careful Chinese characters. Bundles of dried herbs wrapped in cloth. A photograph of her parents on their wedding day. The 17 letters. "Miss?" The conductor gestured. "Your trunk?" "This is all I have." He nodded, tipping his hat, already turning to help the next passenger. The October air smelled different here. Clean, sharp with cold. Nothing like San Francisco's salt and smoke and the constant press of too many people in too little space. Here, the world felt vast and empty, and Meilin felt suddenly very small. She walked to the edge of the platform, searching faces. The town stretched out beyond, a wide dirt street lined with wooden buildings, horses tied to rails, a few wagons moving slowly. Mountains rose in every direction, close enough to feel sheltering, far enough to emphasize the distance she'd traveled. You waiting for someone? The older woman had approached, eyes curious but not unkind. Yes, Ethan Cole. He has a ranch. Cole Ranch is about 8 miles north. The woman shifted her basket. But Ethan doesn't come to town much. Maybe sent someone for you? Perhaps. Meilin's voice stayed steady even as uncertainty crept through her chest. The letters had been specific. I'll meet you at the station. October 15th, 2 o'clock train. It was October 15th. The station clock read 2:30. She waited. The platform emptied. The older woman left. The boy and his father collected their trunk and disappeared into town. New passengers boarded. The train pulled away, whistle crying, leaving Meilin alone with her bag in the autumn wind, and a hope that was starting to feel less like anticipation and more like dread. At 4 o'clock, a wagon rolled up. Not new, but well-maintained. The horse was a sturdy bay, and the man driving sat with the kind of ease that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. Handsome in a hard way, all sharp angles and guarded eyes. Ethan Cole. She knew it before he spoke, knew it in the way her heart recognized something it had built expectations around for months. But his expression held no recognition, no welcome, just confusion. He climbed down slowly, eyes moving from her face to her bag to her face again. Can I help you? The question landed like a stone. I'm Meilin Zhao. She heard the tremor in her voice, fought to steady it. You wrote to me about marriage, about building a life together. Something flickered across his face, surprise, then comprehension, then something that looked almost like pity. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair. Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. The world tilted slightly. Meilin gripped her bag tighter. You're Ethan Cole? I am. Of the Cole Ranch north of town. Yes, but you didn't write these? She pulled the letters from her bag with shaking hands, held them out. He took them, and she watched his face as he read. Watched confusion deepen. Watched him flip through page after page of words he'd supposedly written, and saw in his eyes that every single one was foreign to him. Ma'am. His voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. I never wrote these letters. I never corresponded with anyone about marriage. Someone has... He trailed off, looking at the letters again. Someone used my name. I don't know why, but it wasn't me. The platform seemed to sway beneath her feet. 37 days. Everything she'd owned. Her mother's herbs, the last pieces of the life they'd built together. All of it based on letters written by someone who'd stolen a stranger's name and painted a future that had never existed. I see. The words came out steady. Years of her mother's training. Never show weakness. Never let them see you break. I apologize for the confusion. She turned to pick up her bag, but Ethan's hand on her arm stopped her. His touch was gentle. Wait, you came all this way based on these? Yes. From where? San Francisco. He swore softly, then caught himself. Sorry, but that's... How long have you been traveling? Over a month? He looked at her again, really looked this time, and she saw the moment he understood. Not just the distance, but what the journey must have cost. She saw him notice the worn fabric of her good dress, the bag that held everything she owned, the careful way she held herself together. You got family back there? Someone who can send you money for return passage? No? Friends? No. The word hung in the cold air, so small, so complete. Ethan shifted his weight, the letters still in his hand. The person who wrote these, you got any idea who it might have been? Someone you knew? I never met anyone who knew your name before receiving the first letter. It came in response to an advertisement I placed. She'd been so careful, so desperate. Chinese woman, educated in traditional medicine, seeking correspondence with honorable man interested in partnership. She'd placed it in 3 newspapers, hoping for something better than the grinding poverty and loneliness that had consumed her life after her mother's death. Jesus. Ethan looked at the letters again, then at the empty platform, then at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Look, I've got a spare room at the ranch. It's not much, but you can stay there tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out... No. The word came swift and firm. Thank you, but I cannot. You got somewhere else to go? I'll find lodging in town. With what money? The question was blunt but not cruel, just practical in the way of someone who understood how the world worked. Meilin met his eyes. I have some. It wasn't quite a lie. She had a few coins left. Maybe enough for a week at a boarding house, if she could find one that would rent to a Chinese woman. Maybe enough for meals if she was very careful. Not nearly enough for train fare back to a city where she had nothing to return to anyway. Ethan seemed to read all of this in her face. The boarding house closed last month. There's a hotel, but... He hesitated. Look, I didn't do this to you. I don't know who did, but I got a working ranch and responsibilities, and I can't just leave you on this platform. I'm not your responsibility. No, but someone made you think you were coming to my ranch, to my life. That makes it partly my problem. He picked up her bag before she could protest. One night. The spare room has a lock on the door. I'll sleep in the barn. Tomorrow we'll go to Sheriff Morrison, report this fraud, and figure out your options. Meilin wanted to refuse. Everything in her training, in her mother's careful lessons about dignity and self-reliance, demanded she refuse. But the platform was empty. The October sun was sinking fast, and she had nowhere to go. She bowed her head slightly. One night. Thank you. The ride to the ranch was silent. Meilin sat in the wagon bed because Ethan didn't offer the seat beside him and she didn't ask. The road wound through grassland that glowed gold in the late afternoon light, past stands of pine and aspen just starting to turn. The mountains grew closer, more defined, their peaks catching the last of the sun. It was beautiful. The letters hadn't lied about that. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, a barn that looked recently repaired, corrals holding a few horses, and beyond that, fields running to the tree line. Modest but well-maintained. The kind of place built by someone who understood that on the frontier, carelessness could kill you. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. He climbed down, grabbed her bag, and gestured toward the porch. Come on. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, a hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything functional, nothing decorative. A man's space, and a solitary one. Spare rooms there, Ethan pointed. There's a pump out back for water. I'll bring in some firewood. You need anything else? No, thank you. He nodded, set her bag down, and left without another word. Meilin stood in the middle of the room as the door closed behind him, as his footsteps faded, as silence settled like snow. She'd imagined this moment so many times, arriving at the ranch, meeting Ethan, beginning the careful process of building a life together. In her imagination, it had been awkward but warm, uncertain but hopeful. This felt like standing in a stranger's house because she had nowhere else to go. She walked to the spare room. It was small, a bed, a chair, a window overlooking the mountains, clean and impersonal. The lock on the door worked smoothly when she tested it. Meilin sat on the bed and pulled out the letters. 17 letters written over 4 months. She read them again, looking for clues she'd missed. The handwriting was educated, the spelling perfect. The tone was thoughtful, almost philosophical at times. Whoever wrote them understood loneliness, understood what it meant to want something real in a world full of false promises. I've watched too many people chase passion and mistake it for love, one letter said. What I'm offering isn't romance, it's partnership. Waking up every day knowing someone sees your struggles and shares them, building something that lasts because it's built on truth. Beautiful lies, every word. She set the letters aside and pulled out her mother's medical journal instead. The familiar characters soothed her. Recipes for remedies, notes on patients, observations about herbs and their properties. Her mother had been a skilled healer, trained in traditional methods that had been passed down through generations. She'd tried to teach Meilin everything, and Meilin had been a devoted student, learning to identify herbs, prepare medicines, diagnose ailments through observation and touch. After her mother's death, Meilin had tried to continue the practice, but in Chinatown, everyone was struggling. Most people bartered services or paid in food. The rent on their small room had consumed everything. She'd ended up in the laundry, hands raw from lye and heat, watching her mother's knowledge gather dust because no one could afford to pay for healing. The letters had offered escape from that, a chance to use her skills, to build something, to matter. And now she was in Montana with a handful of coins and nowhere to go. A knock on the door startled her. "Ma'am, I brought wood for the stove." Meilin opened the door. Ethan stood with an armload of split logs, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you." She stepped aside. He crossed to the small iron stove in the corner, loaded it efficiently, struck a match. The fire caught quickly, warmth beginning to spread. "There's beans and bread in the kitchen if you're hungry," he said, not looking at her. "Help yourself." "I don't want to impose further. You're already here. Might as well eat." He straightened, brushed bark from his hands. "I'll be in the barn. Lock the door." "Mr. Cole." "Ethan. No point in formality now." "Ethan." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry for this confusion, for arriving unannounced, for—" "Stop." His voice was firm but not harsh. "You didn't do anything wrong. Someone lied to you, used my name to do it. That's not on you. Still, you've been kind when you had no obligation." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "One night. We'll sort it tomorrow." He left quickly, boots heavy on the wood floor. Meilin locked the door and stood listening to the sound of him moving around outside, then the barn door sliding shut. The house settled into silence. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs, setting her mother's journal and herbs on the small table. The photograph of her parents she placed beside the bed. She didn't cry. Her mother had taught her that tears were private things, not to be spent wastefully. Instead, she made tea from her own supplies, using herbs that reminded her of home. She ate the beans and bread Ethan had mentioned, washing her dishes carefully. She prepared for bed, braiding her hair, changing into her nightdress. Through the window, she could see the barn, lamplight showing through cracks in the walls. She imagined Ethan there, settling into the hay, probably wondering what kind of trouble had landed on his doorstep. She climbed into bed and lay staring at the ceiling, listening to Montana wind move through pine trees, to a coyote calling somewhere in the distance, to the vast silence of a frontier night. Tomorrow she would have to make decisions. Tonight, she let herself feel the weight of everything she'd lost. But somewhere beneath the grief and confusion, beneath the humiliation and fear, something else stirred. Something her mother had cultivated in her through years of training, the ability to adapt. She'd survived her mother's death. She'd survived the grinding poverty of Chinatown. She'd survived a month-long journey across the continent. She could survive this too. She just didn't know how yet. Morning came cold and bright. Meilin woke to the smell of coffee and found Ethan already in the kitchen, setting out breakfast. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread. He nodded when she appeared but didn't speak until she'd poured herself coffee and sat down. "Thought about your situation," he said, his voice rough with mourning. "Best option is probably return to San Francisco. You must know people there, even if not family. I can front you the train fare. You pay it back when you're settled." "That's generous, but I can't accept." "Why not?" "Because I have nothing to return to. No work, no home, no one who would help me." He studied her over his coffee. "Then somewhere else. You got skills?" "I do." She met his eyes. "I'm trained in traditional Chinese medicine, herbal remedies, diagnosis, treatment. My mother was a respected healer." "There's not much call for that here." "I imagine not." They ate in silence for a moment. Then Ethan spoke again carefully. "Look, I'll be straight with you. This is a small town. Not many Chinese folks here. Some people might not be welcoming." "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned back. "Because it's not just unfriendly. It can be dangerous. There's ignorance, and there's—" "I've lived in San Francisco's Chinatown for 6 years," Meilin interrupted quietly. "I understand exactly what you're warning me about." He nodded slowly. "Right, then you know." "I do, and I still have nowhere else to go." The words sat between them, heavy with truth. Ethan stood, clearing dishes. "We'll go to town. Talk to the sheriff. Maybe check if anyone needs help. The hotel might need kitchen work or—" A sharp knock cut him off. Ethan frowned, crossing to the door. He opened it to reveal a boy, maybe 12, breathing hard like he'd been running. "Mr. Cole, my ma sent me. It's Tommy Chen. He's real sick and Dr. Hartwell can't get his breathing right. Ma said maybe that Chinese lady who came on the train yesterday might know something about herbs and—" He broke off, seeing Meilin behind Ethan. How did your mother know about me? Meilin asked, stepping forward. Mrs. Patterson at the station told everyone. She said you were a mail-order bride, but Mr. Cole didn't order you, and there was some kind of mistake, but that you had bags of herbs and— Who's Tommy Chen? Ethan cut in. Chinese kid, lives with the Harpers. They took him in when his parents died. He gets these breathing spells, and Dr. Hartwell's been treating him, but this time nothing's working. He's turning blue, Mr. Cole. Meilin was already moving back to her room. She emerged 30 seconds later with her bag of medical supplies. How far? She asked the boy. 10 minutes if we hurry. Then let's go. Ethan grabbed his coat. I'm coming. They took the wagon, the boy, his name was Jack, giving directions between gasps. The Harper place was on the eastern edge of town, a farmhouse with chickens scratching in the yard. A woman stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, face tight with worry. Mrs. Harper. Meilin climbed down from the wagon. I'm Meilin Zhao. May I see Tommy? The woman's eyes flickered with something, uncertainty, maybe prejudice, but desperation won. Upstairs, first door. Inside, a man leaned over a bed where a small boy struggled for breath. The child's lips were indeed tinged blue, his chest heaving with the effort of pulling in air. An older man with a medical bag stood nearby, looking frustrated and helpless. Dr. Hartwell? Meilin moved to the bedside without waiting for permission. What have you tried? Steam, hot compresses, tincture of lobelia, nothing's working. The doctor's voice was defensive. The boy has weak lungs, always has. Meilin placed her hand on Tommy's chest, feeling the rapid, shallow movements. She listened to his breathing, noting the wheeze, the rattle. She'd seen this before many times. Her mother had taught her the pattern. It's not just weak lungs. She opened her bag, pulling out bundles of herbs. He's having a severe episode. Airways are constricting. Western medicine treats the symptom. We need to treat the root. Now wait just a— Dr. Hartwell began. I need hot water, immediately, Meilin said, her voice calm but absolute. And honey, if you have it. Mrs. Harper hesitated only a second before rushing to comply. Meilin worked quickly, crushing dried herbs, ma huang, which she knew white doctors called ephedra, mixed with ginger and licorice root. She prepared a strong tea, testing the temperature carefully. Help me sit him up, she instructed Mr. Harper. Together they propped Tommy against pillows. Meilin held the cup to his lips, speaking softly in Chinese, words her mother had used, soothing sounds meant to calm rather than communicate meaning. Drink slowly, just small sips. The boy's eyes met hers, frightened but trusting in the way children trust someone who seems certain. He drank. Now we wait, Meilin said, keeping her hand on his chest. And I need to prepare a compress. She mixed crushed mustard seed with hot water, creating a paste that she spread on cloth. This will feel warm, maybe uncomfortable, she told Tommy, but it will help. She placed it on his chest, then prepared a steam treatment with eucalyptus and mint, holding the bowl close so he could breathe the vapors. Dr. Hartwell watched, disapproval clear on his face. This is all unproven folk medicine. No, Meilin said without looking at him. This is medicine practiced for thousands of years before your medical schools existed. You don't have to approve, you just have to watch. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Tommy's breathing began to ease and the terrible wheeze quieted. Color returned to his lips. By 20 minutes, he was breathing almost normally, his chest rising and falling without that desperate struggle. Mrs. Harper's hand covered her mouth. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Thank Miss Zhao, Ethan said quietly from the doorway. Meilin continued monitoring Tommy, checking his pulse, watching for any sign of relapse. After another 10 minutes, she nodded. He needs to finish this tea, 1 cup every 4 hours today. Tomorrow, reduced to 3 times. I'll leave you the herbs and instructions. She pulled out her mother's journal, writing carefully in English. The compress can be used when he feels tightness returning, the steam treatment before bed. Will this happen again? Mrs. Harper asked. Possibly. This condition often comes with cold weather, or sometimes certain plants when they bloom, but now you know how to treat it. Meilin packed her supplies. If it becomes severe again, send for me. You're staying in town? Dr. Hartwell's voice was sharp. I don't know yet. Meilin met his eyes. But wherever I am, if someone needs help, I'll come. She left the house to find half the town had gathered in the yard. News traveled fast on the frontier, and apparently a Chinese woman treating a dying child was news enough to draw a crowd. Meilin walked to the wagon, aware of every eye on her. Some faces showed curiosity, some gratitude, some the blank suspicion that she'd learned to recognize in San Francisco. But no one spoke until she'd climbed up beside Ethan. Then Mrs. Harper called out, "Miss Zhao, wait!" The woman hurried over, pressing something into Meilin's hand. $2 silver. It's not enough, not for saving his life, but it's more than generous, and Meilin closed her fingers around the coins. Thank you. As they drove away, Ethan glanced at her. You always that calm in a crisis? My mother taught me that panic helps no one. Your mother taught you well. He was quiet for a moment. That doctor's not going to be happy. You just showed him up in front of half the town. I showed him nothing. I simply helped a child breathe. He won't see it that way. Then that's his burden, not mine. Ethan's mouth quirked slightly, almost a smile. You're tougher than you look. People often make that mistake. They drove back to the ranch in silence, but it was different now. Less awkward. Something had shifted. Some initial judgment or assumption had been challenged and found wanting. At the ranch, Ethan helped her down from the wagon. About that train fare. I'm not leaving, Meilin said. What? Not yet. Not until I've tried. She met his eyes. You have a spare room. I have skills this town needs, clearly. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? I stay in the spare room and pay rent by helping with cooking, cleaning, whatever work you need, in exchange for room and board while I establish a medical practice. Ethan's expression was unreadable. You want to stay? Here, at my ranch. Just the room. I'll keep to myself. You won't even know I'm here. The whole town will know you're here. They'll talk. Let them. He studied her for a long moment. Why? Why stay after all this? Meilin looked past him at the mountains, at the vast sky, at the life she'd glimpsed in 17 letters written by a liar. Because I have nowhere else to go. And because for the first time since my mother died, I used my skills to help someone. That boy is breathing because of knowledge that's been passed down through my family for generations. Maybe that's why I'm here. Not for the reason I thought, but for a reason nonetheless. That's a hell of a gamble. What else do I have to lose? The question hung in the cold morning air. Finally, Ethan nodded slowly. 1 month. Trial period. You pay rent by helping out, and you can use the spare room to see patients if anyone comes. After a month, we reassess. Agreed. They shook hands, and Meilin felt something settle in her chest. Not hope exactly, she'd learned better than that. But possibility. A small opening where before there'd been only closed doors. She didn't know if this would work. Didn't know if the town would accept her, if she could build a practice, if she could survive a Montana winter in a stranger's spare room. But she knew she would try. And for now, that was enough. The first week passed in a careful dance of distance and necessity. Meilin rose before dawn, made breakfast, left Ethan's portion warming on the stove, and retreated to her room before he came in from morning chores. She cleaned the house in quiet efficiency, washed clothes, mended what needed mending, and prepared meals that appeared as if by invisible hands. She spoke only when spoken to, moved through shared spaces like a ghost, and kept her promise to make herself scarce. Ethan, for his part, maintained his end of the arrangement with equal care. He worked from sunrise to well past sunset, ate the meals she prepared without comment, and nodded his thanks when their paths crossed. He fixed the broken latch on her door without being asked, left firewood stacked outside her room each morning, and never once questioned her presence beyond those first negotiations. They were two strangers sharing a house, nothing more. But the town had other ideas. On the third day, Mrs. Harper arrived with Tommy and a basket of eggs. The boy's breathing had remained clear, and his adopted mother wanted more of the herbal tea, wanted to learn how to prepare it herself. Meilin spent an hour teaching her, writing instructions in careful English, explaining which herbs did what and why. You're a blessing, Mrs. Harper said as she left. A real blessing. 2 days later, an older woman knocked on the door, hat in hand, looking embarrassed but determined. My daughter's got terrible monthly pains. Dr. Hartwell just tells her to bear it, but I heard you might know something. Meilin prepared a mixture of dong quai and white peony, showed the woman how to brew it properly, and accepted payment of a loaf of fresh bread and a jar of preserves. By the end of the first week, 3 more people had found their way to the Cole Ranch, seeking remedies for ailments that ranged from persistent coughs to joint pain that made farm work agony. Meilin treated them all, her supplies of herbs dwindling, but her small store of coins growing. Ethan watched this parade of visitors with an expression she couldn't read. On the 8th morning, he finally broke the silence they'd maintained. "You're going to need more herbs." Meilin looked up from the biscuits she was rolling. "Yes, I've been trying to identify local plants I might substitute, but it's difficult. The growing season here is different than what I'm used to. There's a supply store in town. They might have what you need or could order it." Perhaps. She doubted a frontier supply store would stock traditional Chinese herbs, but she appreciated the suggestion. He hesitated, then pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "Also got this. Came yesterday." He handed it to her. It was a notice, official-looking, from the sheriff's office. An investigation into the fraudulent letters had turned up nothing. No one in town admitted to writing them, no leads had emerged, and without any evidence or witnesses, the case was closed. The writer was either long gone or hiding their tracks too well to be found. Meilin read it twice, then carefully refolded the paper. "I see. Thank you for showing me. You're not upset? Would being upset change anything?" "No, but then there's no point." She returned to her biscuits, pressing the cutter through dough with steady pressure. "Whoever wrote those letters is gone. What remains is what I make of being here." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You're an unusual woman, Miss Zhao." "Because I don't waste energy on things I can't control?" "Because you landed in a situation that would break most people, and you're making biscuits. Everyone has to eat." He almost smiled at that, then caught himself. "I've got business in town today. Hardware store, bank. If you want to come along, check that supply store. You're welcome to ride in." It was the first real offer he'd made beyond the basic terms of their arrangement. Meilin recognized it for what it was, an olive branch, an acknowledgement that she'd held up her end of the bargain and maybe earned a small measure of trust. "I'd appreciate that. Thank you." An hour later, they rolled into town. The main street was busier than it had been on her arrival. Wagons and horses crowding the rails, people moving between shops. Several turned to watch as Ethan's wagon passed, and Meilin felt the weight of their stares. "You can ignore them," Ethan said quietly. "I'm used to it." He pulled up in front of the hardware store. "Meet back here in an hour?" "Yes." Meilin climbed down and made her way to the supply store, aware of heads turning, conversations pausing. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, the armor she'd perfected in San Francisco settling into place. The supply store was dim and crowded with goods. Barrels of nails, coils of rope, tools hanging from the walls, sacks of grain and flour stacked in corners. A man behind the counter looked up as she entered, his expression shifting from polite interest to guarded suspicion. "Help you?" "I'm looking for dried herbs, medicinal herbs specifically." "Don't carry nothing like that. Try the doctor." "Dr. Hartwell wouldn't have what I need. I'm looking for specific thought." "Said I don't carry it." His tone closed the door on further discussion. Meilin nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Near the door, a small shelf held jars of dried plants. Lavender, chamomile, peppermint, things common enough to stock for tea or household use. Not what she needed, but not nothing either. "How much for the peppermint and chamomile?" The man named a price that was too high by half. Meilin paid it without argument and left. Outside, she nearly collided with a woman who'd been standing close to the door. The woman stepped back, looked Meilin up and down with undisguised curiosity. "You're her, the one staying at Cole's ranch." "I am." "Name's Sarah Mitchell. My husband runs the sawmill." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Listen, I heard what you did for Tommy Harper. My boy's got something wrong with his stomach. Can't keep food down, getting real thin. Doc Hartwell says it's just nerves, but I know my son. Could you look at him?" Meilin saw the desperation in the woman's eyes, recognized it because she'd seen it in her mother's patients. in the faces of people who'd tried everything else and were down to their last hope. "Where do you live?" "North edge of town, yellow house with the green shutters. Could you come today?" "This afternoon, around 2 o'clock. Relief flooded Sarah's face. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'll pay whatever. We'll discuss that after I see your son." Meilin continued down the street, making note of the buildings, the layout, the rhythms of this place that might become her home. A hotel, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, a building marked Dr. Hartwell, physician. She paused outside the doctor's office, considering whether to introduce herself properly, then decided against it. He knew who she was. If he wanted to speak with her, he knew where to find her. She was studying the display in a dry goods store window when a voice behind her made her turn. "Well now, what do we have here?" The man was tall and well-dressed, too well-dressed for casual business in a frontier town. His suit was tailored, his boots polished, his hat expensive. He looked at Meilin with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're the Chinese woman staying at the Cole Ranch. Caused quite a stir, I understand." "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Victor Hale." He tipped his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "I own several businesses in town. The hotel, the saloon, some mining interests in the mountains. I make it my business to know everyone who settles here." "I haven't settled. I'm simply staying temporarily." "Ah, but I hear you're setting up some kind of medical practice, treating people with exotic remedies." His tone made it sound vaguely scandalous. "I help people when I can." "How charitable." He moved closer, and Meilin fought the urge to step back. "Thing is, we already have a doctor. Dr. Hartwell is a respected man, trained at a proper medical college. I'm sure you can understand why folks might be hesitant to trust alternative methods. Those who want my help seek it. Those who don't are free to go elsewhere." Of course." His smile widened. "I'm just thinking of your welfare, Miss Zhao. A woman alone, especially a Chinese woman, might find it difficult to establish herself here. People can be set in their ways, unless, of course, she had the right kind of support." "What kind of support?" "Well, I'm always looking for interesting investments. A medical practice, properly managed and endorsed, could be quite profitable. I'd be willing to provide space, supplies, even help with patients. All I'd ask in return is a reasonable percentage of the proceeds." Meilin studied him. His clothes, his manner, the casual way he talked about ownership and control. She'd met men like Victor Hale before. In San Francisco, they ran the gambling houses and opium dens, the places that preyed on the desperate. They spoke in smooth voices about opportunities while slowly tightening chains. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Hale, but I'm not interested." His smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. "You might want to reconsider. This town can be unwelcoming to outsiders. Having the right friends makes all the difference." "I'll manage." "Will you? Living on Ethan Cole's charity, treating people in a spare room? That's no way to build a future." He leaned in slightly. "I could offer you real stability, a proper office, a place in town, respectability. All you have to do is accept my partnership. And all you'd have to do is control my practice, my patients, and my decisions." "No, Mr. Hale. I'd rather manage on my own." For a moment, the pleasant mask slipped, and Meilin saw the man underneath, calculating, cold, used to getting what he wanted. "That's unfortunate," he said softly. "I do hope you won't regret that choice." He tipped his hat again and walked away, leaving Meilin standing in the street with a knot of unease in her stomach. She'd made an enemy today. She knew it in the same way she knew a storm was coming by the feel of the air. Making friends already. She turned to find Ethan leaning against his wagon, watching her with those unreadable eyes. "I met Mr. Hale." "I saw. What did he want?" "To offer me a business partnership." Ethan's expression darkened. "And you said—" "No." He nodded slowly. "Good. Victor Hale doesn't make offers. He makes deals that benefit him and trap everyone else. Half the businesses in town are in debt to him, and the other half are smart enough to stay clear. He didn't seem pleased with my refusal." "He wouldn't be. Hale likes to control things, and you just told him he can't control you." Ethan pushed off from the wagon. "You ready to head back?" "I have one more stop, a patient." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Already?" A woman asked me to see her son. I said I'd come at 2. Want company? The offer surprised her. You don't have to. Hale already knows who you are and where you're staying. Might as well make it clear you're not completely alone. He checked his pocket watch. We've got an hour. Come on, I'll buy you lunch. The small restaurant was nearly empty. Just a few men at a corner table and a woman behind the counter who looked up with curiosity when they entered. Ethan chose a table near the window and gestured for Meilin to sit. 2 lunch specials, Clara, he called. Coming right up, Ethan. The woman's eyes lingered on Meilin. This the mail-order bride everyone's talking about? This is Miss Zhao. She's renting a room at my place while she establishes a medical practice. Is that so? Clara brought over 2 cups of coffee. Heard you helped the Harper boy. That true? I treated him, yes. Huh. Well, any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. She bustled back to the kitchen. They sat in silence for a moment, Meilin warming her hands on the coffee cup. Finally, she spoke. You didn't have to do that. Clarify our arrangement to her. This is a small town. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Better to be clear from the start. Even if being clear means associating with me might damage your reputation? Ethan's jaw tightened. My reputation can handle it. Can it? I'm a Chinese woman living in your house, unmarried, unchaperoned. You're renting a room and paying your way. Anyone who wants to make something dirty out of that says more about them than us. Clara brought their food, stew and fresh bread, simple but good. They ate in silence until Meilin finally asked the question that had been bothering her. Why are you helping me? You could have put me on a train back to San Francisco. Could have let me find my own way. Why didn't you? Ethan set down his spoon, considering. You want the honest answer? Always. I don't know. He met her eyes. Maybe because you got dealt a raw hand through no fault of your own. Maybe because you didn't fall apart when you had every right to. Maybe because watching you save that kid reminded me that there's more than one kind of strength. He paused. My wife used to say that how you treat people when there's nothing in it for you tells you who you really are. It was the first time he'd mentioned a wife. Meilin absorbed this information carefully, noting the past tense, the way his voice softened slightly on the word wife. She sounds wise. She was. He returned to his stew, clearly done with that topic. They finished eating and made their way to the Mitchell house. Sarah greeted them at the door, looking relieved and anxious in equal measure. He's in the back room. He's having a bad day. The boy was maybe 8, thin in a way that spoke of more than just childhood lankiness. His skin had a grayish cast, and when Meilin placed her hand on his forehead, she felt the clamminess of chronic illness. Hello, I'm Meilin. What's your name? Daniel. His voice was weak. Daniel, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be very honest with me. Can you do that? He nodded. Does your stomach hurt all the time, or only sometimes? After I eat mostly, sometimes other times too. Show me where it hurts. He pointed to his upper abdomen, right side. Meilin pressed gently, watching his face. He winced, but didn't cry out. Do you ever taste something bitter in your mouth, especially in the morning or after eating? Yeah, it's gross. I imagine it is. She pulled out her mother's journal, checking notes she'd memorized but wanted to confirm. Does eating make it worse or better? Worse. Makes me want to throw up. She asked more questions about his sleep, his energy, the color of his waist, whether certain foods bothered him more than others. A picture was forming, one she'd seen before. Mrs. Mitchell, she said finally, I believe Daniel has a digestive disorder. His stomach produces too much acid, which irritates the lining and causes pain and nausea. It's treatable, but it will require changes. What kind of changes? Diet, primarily. He needs to avoid fatty foods, spicy foods, anything acidic like tomatoes or citrus, small meals more frequently. I can prepare an herbal remedy that will help soothe the inflammation and reduce the acid. Will it cure him? It will manage the symptoms. If he's careful with his diet and takes the remedy regularly, he should improve significantly. But this is a chronic condition. It will require ongoing care. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Dr. Hartwell said it was in his head, said I was coddling him. It's not in his head. It's very real, and it's been making him miserable. Meilin pulled herbs from her bag: licorice root, slippery elm, meadow sweet. I'll prepare the first batch now and show you how to make more. You should start feeling better within a few days. She worked efficiently, grinding and mixing, explaining each step to Sarah. Ethan stood by the door watching in silence. When she finished, she measured out a dose and gave it to Daniel. It doesn't taste good, she warned, but it will help. The boy drank it without complaint, desperate enough to try anything. He'll need to take this 3 times a day before meals, Meilin instructed, and I'll need to see him weekly to monitor his progress. If the remedy isn't working, we'll adjust it. How much do I owe you? Meilin considered. The Mitchell's house was modest but well-maintained. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either. $2 for today, 50 cents for each follow-up visit, plus the cost of herbs when they need replenishing. Sarah paid without hesitation, pressing the coins into Meilin's hand along with something else, a small folded note. What's this? Names and addresses, people who've been asking about you, wanting to know if you're taking patients. I told them I'd find out. Meilin unfolded the note. 8 names, 8 addresses, 8 people who apparently wanted her help badly enough to ask a stranger to make inquiries. Thank you. On the ride back to the ranch, Ethan finally spoke. You're building a practice. It appears so. Dr. Hartwell's not going to like it. No, and apparently neither is Mr. Hale. Hale's dangerous. He doesn't like competition or anyone who operates outside his sphere of influence. You turn down his offer, then start succeeding on your own. It makes him look weak. What would you suggest I do? Accept his partnership to avoid making an enemy? No, but I'd suggest being careful, real careful. He glanced at her. You've got friends in this town now, people you've helped. But you've also got people who'll see you as a threat to the established order. That's a dangerous place to be. It's the only place I have. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice quieter. For what it's worth, I think you're doing something good here, something important. It was the closest thing to approval he'd given, and Meilin felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. Thank you. That night, she sat at the small table in her room, writing out instructions for remedies, organizing her supplies, planning how to stretch her dwindling herbs. She'd need to make a trip to a larger city soon, somewhere that might have access to the plants she needed. But for now, she was making do. A soft knock interrupted her work. Miss Zhao? Ethan's voice through the door. Got something for you. She opened it to find him holding a wooden box, roughly made but sturdy. Figured you needed somewhere proper to keep those herbs organized. Made this in the barn. The box had small dividers inside, perfect for separating different plants. Simple, functional, and clearly made with care. This is... Thank you. It's perfect. Well, you're helping people. Seemed like you could use proper equipment. He shifted, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyway, good night. Ethan? She stopped him before he could leave. Your wife. What was her name? He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, Catherine. She died 3 years ago. Fever took her in 2 days. I'm sorry. Me too. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw past his careful defenses to the grief underneath. She would have liked you. She always believed in helping people, no matter what it cost. She sounds like she was extraordinary. She was. He nodded once and left, closing the door gently behind him. Meilin stood holding the wooden box, feeling the weight of something shifting between them. Not attraction, not yet, maybe not ever, but recognition. 2 people who'd lost things they'd never get back, finding ways to keep moving forward. She organized her herbs in the new box, each one finding its proper place. Outside, wind moved through the pines, carrying the promise of winter. The mountains stood dark against a star-filled sky, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called. Meilin thought about the list in her pocket, about the 8 people who wanted her help. She thought about Victor Hale's veiled threats and Dr. Hartwell's disapproval. She thought about the careful distance Ethan maintained and the small kindness of a wooden box made in a barn. She'd been in Montana for 2 weeks. She'd arrived expecting a husband and found a stranger. Expected a home and found a rented room. expected her life to begin, and instead found it continuing in ways she never could have imagined. But she was still here, still standing, still helping people. And for now, that was more than enough. The next morning brought another visitor, this time a rancher who'd thrown out his back and couldn't stand straight. Meilin treated him with a combination of herbs and careful manipulation, showing his wife how to apply hot compresses and which movements to avoid. By the end of the week, she'd seen 12 patients. Her small store of coins had grown, and her reputation had spread to neighboring ranches. She also made her first enemy official. Dr. Hartwell appeared at the ranch on a cold Saturday morning, his face set in rigid disapproval. Ethan was working in the far pasture, and Meilin was alone when the doctor knocked. "Dr. Hartwell." She kept her voice neutral. "Can I help you?" "You can stop practicing medicine without proper credentials in this town." "I haven't claimed to be a doctor. I'm an herbalist treating people who seek my help voluntarily." "You're undermining established medical practice with unproven folk remedies. You're putting people at risk." "I saved Tommy Harper's life when your treatment failed. I've helped Daniel Mitchell keep food down for the first time in months. I've relieved suffering you dismissed or couldn't treat. How exactly am I putting people at risk?" His face reddened. "Those are isolated cases. Your methods are not scientifically validated. Neither were yours 200 years ago. Medicine evolves, doctor. Perhaps instead of seeing me as a threat, you might consider that different approaches can work together. I'll be speaking to the town council about this. There are regulations, then speak to them. If they want to prohibit me from helping people who specifically request my services, they're welcome to try. But we both know what will happen when they tell Mrs. Harper she can't bring Tommy to see me, or when they inform Sarah Mitchell that her son will have to go back to suffering because my methods aren't approved." She kept her voice level, but her eyes were steady on his. "Doctor." Hartwell stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. Meilin watched him ride away and felt the situation crystallizing. Battle lines were being drawn, whether she wanted them or not. Hartwell represented the established order, the certainty that Western medicine was the only valid approach. She represented change, alternatives, methods that threatened his monopoly on healing. And Victor Hale, she suspected, was watching all of this with great interest, waiting to see where the pieces would fall. That evening, Ethan found her in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkening mountains. "Heard Hartwell paid you a visit." "Word travels fast. Jack Mitchell saw him ride out here. Kid tells his mother everything, and Sarah tells half the town." He poured himself coffee. "What did he want?" "To threaten me with the town council, to make me stop treating people." "What did you say?" "That he's welcome to try, but it won't end well for anyone." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're not backing down." "Should I?" "That's not for me to say, but you should know what you're getting into. Hartwell's got influence. He's been the only doctor here for 15 years. Council members are his friends. If he pushes hard enough, they could make things difficult." "Let them." Meilin turned to face him. "I came here by accident based on lies with nowhere else to go. I could have given up, could have let circumstance break me. But I'm still here, and people need what I know. I won't apologize for that." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "No, I don't imagine you will." They stood in the kitchen as night fell outside, two people who'd somehow become allies in a situation neither had planned for. The month trial was nearly over, and neither had mentioned it. Meilin had proven herself useful, more than useful, and Ethan had proven himself decent in ways that mattered. "The month's almost up," he said finally, echoing her thoughts. "It is." "You planning to stay?" "If the arrangement still suits you." "It does." He hesitated, then added, "You've held up your end more than fair. House has never been cleaner, meals have never been better, and you're helping people who need it. I've got no complaints." "Then I'll stay. For now." "For now," he agreed. But they both knew it was becoming more than that. Not romance, not the partnership those false letters had promised, but something real nonetheless. Two solitary people finding unexpected companionship in shared space and shared purpose. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering the Montana landscape in white. Winter was coming, And with it, Meilin suspected, the real test of whether she could survive in this place she'd never meant to come to, but was slowly, carefully beginning to call home. Winter arrived in earnest the week after that first snow, transforming the Montana landscape into something both beautiful and merciless. The temperature dropped until breath frosted in the air, until water left in buckets overnight turned to solid ice, until the wind carried a bite that found every gap in clothing and every crack in walls. Meilin had never experienced cold like this. San Francisco's winters had been mild, damp, but rarely freezing. This was different, a cold that made her bones ache, that turned her fingers clumsy when she tried to work, that crept into the house no matter how high she built the fire. But with the cold came something unexpected, more patience. Winter illnesses swept through town like a slow tide, coughs that wouldn't ease, fevers that lingered, children struggling with croup in the night. Dr. Hartwell treated them with his standard remedies, whiskey and rest for adults, camphor rubs for children, bloodletting when fevers ran too high. Some patients improved. Many didn't. And slowly, quietly, people began seeking Meilin instead. She treated them in her small room, the wooden box Ethan had made overflowing now with what herbs she had left. She'd learned to substitute local plants where she could, yarrow for fever, wild ginger for nausea, pine resin for infections. Her mother's journal became more precious than ever, each page a guide through unfamiliar territory. By mid-November, she was seeing 4 or 5 patients a day. By December, she'd had to turn people away, unable to treat everyone who came seeking help. "You need proper space," Ethan said one evening as she cleaned up after the day's final patient. "Can't keep doing this in a bedroom." "I don't have anywhere else." "What about the old storage room off the barn? It's got a wood stove, window for light. I could clean it out, make it suitable." Meilin paused in sorting her herbs. "That's generous, but it's practical. You're helping people, bringing in steady income, and having them traipse through the house all day isn't working anymore. Besides," he added, voice gruff, "you've more than paid for the space with everything you do around here." "Ethan, don't argue. I'll start tomorrow." He left before she could protest further, and Meilin stood holding a bundle of dried sage, feeling something warm unfold in her chest. It wasn't the first kindness he'd shown. There'd been the wooden box, the firewood always stacked, the way he'd started asking how her day went over supper. Small gestures, but they added up to something that felt dangerously close to caring. She pushed the thought away. Ethan was being practical, nothing more. She was a tenant who'd proven useful. This was business. But late that night, lying in bed listening to wind howl around the house, she let herself acknowledge a truth she'd been avoiding. She was becoming attached to this place, to the rhythm of ranch life, to the satisfaction of helping people, to the quiet companionship she and Ethan had developed. And that attachment frightened her more than Victor Hale's veiled threats or Dr. Hartwell's disapproval, because attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant something could be taken away. The next morning brought trouble in the form of a well-dressed woman at the door. She introduced herself as Margaret Winters, wife of the town council chairman, and her expression held the kind of polite coldness that Meilin recognized immediately. "Miss Zhao, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Please, come in." Margaret entered with the careful steps of someone inspecting potentially contaminated space. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The herbs drying by the window, the simple furniture, the Chinese characters in Meilin's mother's journal lying open on the table. "I'll be direct," Margaret said, remaining standing despite Meilin's gesture toward a chair. "There are concerns in town about your activities. My medical practice. If we can call it that. You have no formal training, no credentials, no license to practice medicine in this territory. I never claimed to be a physician. I'm an herbalist offering traditional remedies to people who seek them voluntarily." "Yes, well, there are questions about the legality of that. And more pressingly, questions about propriety." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "You're an unmarried woman living alone with a man. Surely you can see how that appears." "I rent a room and pay my way through housework. Mr. Cole maintains his own quarters. There's nothing improper about the arrangement." "Perhaps not technically, but appearances matter, Miss Zhao. They matter a great deal in a respectable community. And when you add your background to the situation, it becomes even more concerning. There it was, the real issue dressed up in talk of propriety and credentials. Meilin kept her voice level. My background. You're Chinese. In a town where most people have never encountered someone of your race, there are concerns about cultural practices, about methods that might be unsuitable for Christian families, about whether a Chinese woman can be trusted to treat white patients. Meilin finished quietly. Margaret's face flushed. That's not what I said, but it's what you meant. I'm here representing legitimate concerns from the community. Dr. Hartwell is a respected physician who trained at a proper medical college. You're an outsider practicing foreign medicine without oversight. Surely you can understand why that might worry people. The people who come to me don't seem worried. They seem grateful. Because you charge less than Dr. Hartwell and tell them what they want to hear. But what happens when your remedies fail? When someone gets worse under your care? Who takes responsibility then? Meilin met the woman's eyes steadily. I do. Just as Dr. Hartwell should take responsibility when his treatments fail. The difference is, I don't pretend to know everything. I work within my knowledge, refer patients elsewhere when needed, and I've never once claimed superiority over Western medicine. Can Dr. Hartwell say the same about traditional practices? Margaret's mouth thinned. The council will be discussing this matter. I'd suggest you attend the next meeting and be prepared to answer questions about your qualifications and your intentions in this town. When is the meeting? Friday evening, 7 o'clock at the town hall. Margaret moved toward the door, then paused. A word of advice, Miss Zhao. This town has its ways, its established order. People who try to disrupt that order rarely find happiness here. You might want to consider whether staying is truly in your best interest. Is that a threat? It's friendly counsel. Take it as you will. She left, and Meilin stood in the empty room, feeling the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about medicine anymore. This was about power, control, and who had the right to decide how things were done. She was still standing there when Ethan came in from the barn, took one look at her face, and frowned. What happened? She told him about Margaret's visit, about the council meeting, about the thinly veiled suggestion that she leave town. Ethan's expression grew darker with each word. That's Victor Hale's doing, he said when she finished. Margaret Winters doesn't think for herself. If she's here making threats, it's because someone told her to. Dr. Hartwell? Maybe, or Hale himself, probably both working together. He paced to the window, jaw tight. Hale doesn't like that you turned him down, doesn't like that you're succeeding without his help. And Hartwell sees every patient you treat as money out of his pocket. Together, they've got enough influence to make the council do whatever they want. So what do I do? Ethan turned to face her. You go to that meeting. You stand up in front of the whole damn town and you defend yourself. You tell them exactly what you've done, who you've helped, what you've treated, how many people are better off because of your knowledge. You make them look you in the eye and tell you that doesn't matter. And if they do, if the council rules against me, then we figure out the next step. But you don't back down without a fight. He crossed the room, and for the first time since she'd known him, he placed a hand on her shoulder. You've got more friends in this town than you think. People you've helped, people who see what you're doing. Let them speak for you. His hand was warm through the fabric of her dress, steady and solid. Meilin felt tears prickle behind her eyes and blinked them away fiercely. Why are you doing this? Helping me, I mean. You could have stayed out of it. Because it's right, and because... He hesitated, then continued quietly, because Catherine would have done the same thing. She never could stand bullies, never could watch someone being pushed around without stepping in. Guess some of that rubbed off on me. He dropped his hand and stepped back, the moment of closeness passing. But something had shifted between them, some understanding deepening. Thank you, Meilin said. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. He was right. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. 2 of Meilin's regular patients stopped coming, sending apologetic notes about needing to use proper medical care. The supply store refused to sell her anything, claiming they were out of stock even when she could see the items on the shelves. And someone, she never found out who, started a rumor that her herbs were actually opium, that she was slowly addicting her patients to make them dependent. The rumor was absurd. easily disproven by anyone who'd actually seen her remedies or experienced their effects. But absurd didn't matter. The whisper was enough to plant doubt, to make people hesitate. Still, others remained loyal. Sarah Mitchell came by with Daniel, who was thriving on the diet changes and herbal treatments. Mrs. Harper brought Tommy for a checkup and stayed an hour, helping Meilin prepare remedies and talking loudly about how the foreign medicine had saved her boy when proper doctors had failed. Word spread about the barn room Ethan was converting, and several patients offered to help with the work. By Friday, battle lines had been clearly drawn. The town hall was packed that evening, every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Meilin arrived with Ethan beside her and felt every eye in the room track their entrance. She wore her best dress, had pinned her hair carefully, and carried her mother's medical journal like a shield. The council sat at a table at the front, 5 men, all middle-aged or older, all looking uncomfortable with the crowd and the attention. Chairman Winters cleared his throat importantly. "We're here to discuss the matter of Miss Zhao's medical practice and its impact on our community. Dr. Hartwell has raised concerns that we feel warrant public discussion." Dr. Hartwell stood, his expression grave. "Thank you, Chairman. I want to be clear that I bear Miss Zhao no personal ill will. However, as the only licensed physician in this town, I have a responsibility to protect public health. Miss Zhao practices medicine with no formal training, using remedies that have not been scientifically validated. She operates without oversight, without regulation, and without the knowledge base that comes from proper medical education." He paused, letting that sink in. "I've seen patients who've come to me after trying her treatments. Some were merely disappointed when exotic herbs failed to cure them. Others suffered adverse effects from unknown substances. This isn't about prejudice or competition. It's about ensuring the safety and well-being of our community." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hartwell sat down looking satisfied. Chairman Winters nodded. "Miss Zhao, would you like to respond?" Meilin stood, aware of her hands trembling slightly, forcing them to stillness. "Dr. Hartwell says he's seen patients who came to him after my treatments failed. I'd like to know their names because I keep detailed records of everyone I treat and their outcomes." Hartwell shifted. "Patient confidentiality prevents you from making unsubstantiated claims in a public forum? How convenient." Meilin kept her voice calm despite her racing heart. "I've treated 43 patients since arriving in this town. 43 people suffering from conditions ranging from respiratory distress to chronic pain to digestive disorders. I can document every case, every treatment, every outcome. Can Dr. Hartwell say the same?" "That's not the point." "Then what is the point? That my methods are different? That I learned from my mother instead of a medical college? That I use herbs instead of manufactured medicines?" She opened her mother's journal. "This book contains knowledge passed down through generations, refined through centuries of practice. It's not exotic or mysterious. It's medicine, just as valid as what Dr. Hartwell learned in his classrooms." "It's unproven folk remedies," Hartwell interjected. "Superstition dressed up as healing." "Like bloodletting?" Meilin asked quietly. "Like mercury treatments? Like all the proven Western methods that have killed more patients than they've saved? Your medicine has its failures too, doctor. The difference is I acknowledge mine." The room had gone silent. Even Chairman Winters looked uncertain about how to proceed. Then Sarah Mitchell stood. "I'd like to speak." "Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't a general forum. My son was dying." Sarah's voice cut across the chairman's objection. "He couldn't keep food down. He was wasting away, and Dr. Hartwell told me it was nerves, that I was coddling him, that he'd grow out of it. Miss Zhao diagnosed a real condition, provided real treatment, and my boy is healthy for the first time in a year. That's not folk medicine. That's healing." Mrs. Harper stood next. "My Tommy couldn't breathe. He was turning blue, and Dr. Hartwell's remedies weren't working. Miss Zhao saved his life with herbs and knowledge. I don't care where she learned it. I care that my son is alive." Others rose, one by one. The rancher with the bad back, the woman with monthly pains, an older man whose arthritis had improved enough that he could work again, each one telling their story, each one testimony to Meilin's skill and care. Dr. Hartwell's face grew redder with each account. Finally, he stood again. "This is exactly the problem. She's turning you against proper medical care, making you believe in unproven methods. We believe in what works, Sarah interrupted. What works for us, in our own bodies. Isn't that what medicine is supposed to be about? Victor Hale chose that moment to make his entrance. He'd been standing in the back, Meilin realized, watching everything unfold. Now he moved forward, his presence commanding attention. If I may, he said smoothly, I think we're missing the larger picture here. This isn't just about medicine. It's about standards, about maintaining the quality and reputation of our community. Miss Zhao may have helped some people, but at what cost to our town's standing? We're trying to attract respectable businesses, families looking to settle in a civilized place. Having unlicensed practitioners, especially of such foreign methods, sends the wrong message. What message would that be? Ethan's voice came from beside Meilin, hard as iron. That we care about helping people more than we care about appearances? That we have standards, Cole. That we don't let just anyone set up shop claiming to be healers. Today it's herbs and teas. Tomorrow it could be something far worse. Hale's eyes fixed on Meilin. We know nothing about this woman's real background, her true intentions. For all we know, she's exactly what the rumors suggest. Someone peddling addictive substances to vulnerable people. That's a lie, Meilin said, her voice shaking now with anger rather than fear. I have never, not once, given anyone anything harmful or addictive. Every remedy I prepare is documented. Every patient can verify what they received and its effects. If you want to question my methods, question them with facts, not slander. Facts? Hale smiled coldly. Here's a fact. You're a Chinese woman with no credentials living unmarried with a local rancher and treating our citizens with unknown substances. Those are facts. And here's another fact, Ethan said, standing. Every word you just said was designed to make people afraid instead of thinking clearly. You want to talk about Miss Zhao's character? Let's talk about yours, Hale. How many businesses in this town are in debt to you? How many people have lost their property because you called in loans at exactly the wrong time? You want to run her out because she won't let you control her, same as you control half this town. The room erupted, people shouting, some in support of Ethan's words, others defending Hale, still others trying to restore order. Chairman Winters banged his gavel uselessly. In the chaos, Meilin saw Margaret Winters lean over to whisper to her husband, saw Dr. Hartwell and Victor Hale exchange glances. Saw the careful orchestration behind what was meant to look like community concern. They'd planned this, all of it. The rumors, the timing, the public confrontation. They'd wanted her to fail in front of everyone, to be humiliated and driven out. But they'd miscalculated. They hadn't counted on the people she'd helped speaking up. Hadn't counted on Ethan defending her so publicly, hadn't counted on her refusing to crumble. When order was finally restored, Chairman Winters looked exhausted and uncertain. This matter clearly requires more consideration than we can give it tonight. The council will discuss privately and issue a ruling next week. And in the meantime, Dr. Hartwell demanded, she continues practicing without regulation? In the meantime, unless there's evidence of actual harm, not rumors or speculation, Miss Zhao is free to continue helping those who seek her services voluntarily. Winters banged his gavel. Meeting adjourned. People filed out slowly, clusters forming to continue arguments started inside. Sarah Mitchell hugged Meilin fiercely. We're with you, she whispered. Don't let them scare you off. Others approached with similar sentiments, quiet words of support, promises to speak on her behalf. But Meilin also saw the looks from those who sided with Hale and Hartwell. Cold stares, pursed lips, judgment rendered without trial. Outside, the December air was sharp enough to hurt. Ethan walked beside her to the wagon in silence. Only when they were moving, the town falling behind them, did he speak. You held your ground. Did I? Or did I just make everything worse? You made them see you, made them acknowledge what you've done. That's not nothing. Hale and Hartwell will retaliate. You know they will. Probably, but you've got allies now too. That changes things. They rode through the cold darkness, and Meilin replayed the evening in her mind. The accusations, the testimonies, the way battle lines had been drawn so clearly. She thought about Victor Hale's cold smile, about Dr. Hartwell's rigid certainty, about Margaret Winters' whispered conversation with her husband. Ethan, she said slowly, When Chairman Winters said the council would discuss privately, who sits on that council? Winters, obviously. Tom Harper, he's a fair man, probably on your side after what you did for Tommy. Bill Stevens, the saloon owner. Jacob Morrison, the sheriff. And he paused. And? And Vincent Shaw. He owns the hotel. The hotel that Victor Hale owns, Meilin finished. Right. So that's at least one vote in Hale's pocket. Probably two if Stevens sides with business interests over fairness. Which means I need 3 votes to stay. Harper is likely. What about Morrison? Hard to say. He's a lawman, tends to go by the book. Might argue there's no legal standing to shut you down, or might argue you need proper licensing. Could go either way. So it comes down to Chairman Winters, who's married to Margaret and probably getting an earful right now about propriety and community standards. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's not a good position. They reached the ranch, and Ethan helped her down from the wagon. In the lamplight from the house, his face looked tired and worried. "I'm sorry," Meilin said quietly. "I've brought trouble to your door." "You didn't bring it. You just revealed what was already here. People like Hale who want to control everything and everyone. That fight was coming whether you arrived or not." He met her eyes. "But I meant what I said in there. I'm with you on this." "Why? You barely know me. This isn't your battle." "Maybe not. But Catherine used to say that staying silent when someone's wronged makes you part of the wrong. And I stayed silent too many times in my life already." He turned toward the barn, and Meilin watched him go, feeling the weight of what he'd risked tonight. Ethan Cole was a private man, someone who kept to himself and his ranch. By speaking up publicly, by defending her so openly, he'd made enemies of powerful men. And he'd done it anyway. Inside, she stoked the fire and made tea from the last of her chamomile, hands finally shaking now that no one was watching. The confrontation had taken more from her than she'd admitted. She'd faced judgment before, but never so publicly, never with so much hanging in the balance. She pulled out her mother's journal, running her fingers over the familiar characters. Her mother had faced similar resistance in San Francisco, had fought to be taken seriously as a healer in a community that often dismissed women's knowledge. But she'd persevered, had built a practice through sheer skill and determination. "What would you do, Mama?" Meilin whispered to the empty room. She knew the answer. Her mother would keep working, keep helping, keep proving herself one patient at a time until even her detractors couldn't deny her skill. So that's what Meilin would do too. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Morrison arrived just as Meilin was clearing breakfast dishes, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Miss Zhao, got a minute?" "Of course, Sheriff. Coffee?" "Appreciate it." They sat at the kitchen table, and Morrison wrapped his hands around the cup, gathering his thoughts. "Look, I'm not here officially. This is just a conversation between you and me. I understand." "Good, because I need to be straight with you. There's pressure building, and it's coming from directions you might not expect. Victor Hale's been making noise about bringing in territorial authorities, claiming you're operating outside legal bounds." "Doctor, Hartwell's talking about filing formal complaints. And there are people in town who are genuinely worried, whether their worries justified or not." "What do you think, Sheriff?" He took a long drink of coffee. "I think you helped my deputy's daughter get over a cough that had been plaguing her for months. I think you treated the mayor's wife's headaches when nothing else worked. And I think Hale and Hartwell are more interested in protecting their interests than protecting people." He set down the cup. "But what I think doesn't change the politics of the situation. What are you suggesting?" "That you be careful. Real careful. Don't give them any ammunition. Keep perfect records. Document everything. Make sure every single patient understands exactly what you're giving them and why. And," he hesitated, "and maybe consider getting some kind of official endorsement. Someone with medical credentials who can vouch for your methods." "Doctor, Hartwell is the only physician within 100 miles. There are others in the territory. Maybe one of them would be willing to review your practices, give you some kind of letter of support. It wouldn't be an official license, but it might be enough to satisfy the legal questions." Meilin considered this. "That's actually good advice. Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet. The council meets Wednesday to vote. Between now and then, a lot can happen." He stood, settling his hat. Just watch yourself, Miss Zhao, and maybe watch Ethan too. He made himself a target last night. After Morrison left, Meilin stood at the window watching the sheriff right away. His warning echoed in her mind. Watch Ethan too. She hadn't considered that her troubles might spill onto him, might damage more than just her own prospects. She was still standing there when Ethan came in from the barn. Morrison give you trouble? No, the opposite, actually. He gave me advice. She told him about the suggestion to seek endorsement from another physician. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. That's smart. There's a doctor in Helena, trained back east but respects traditional methods. I could write to him, explain the situation. That would take weeks. Better than nothing. And in the meantime, we make sure you're beyond reproach. Perfect records, perfect practice, perfect everything. Perfection is impossible. Then we get as close as we can. His eyes were serious. This is a fight worth having, Meilin, but only if we fight it smart. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it caught her off guard, sent warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. Ethan, she said carefully, the sheriff warned me about how you made yourself a target last night. I don't want... Stop. I knew what I was doing. But your reputation, your standing in the community... My standing doesn't mean a damn thing if I use it to stay quiet when someone's being wronged. He moved closer, and she could see the determination in his eyes. You came here through no fault of your own, built something good from nothing, and helped people who needed it. I'll be damned if I watch them drive you out because you threatened the wrong people's profits. You might lose friends over this. Then they weren't friends worth keeping. They stood close enough that Meilin could see the gray threading through his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes, the weathering that came from years of frontier life. She saw strength there, and something else, a loneliness that matched her own. Thank you, she said softly. Stop thanking me. We're in this together now. And standing in that Montana kitchen, winter wind howling outside, battle lines drawn and enemies circling, Meilin realized with a jolt that went straight through her that she trusted this man. Trusted him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since her mother died. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The evidence lay spread across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that was finally beginning to form a picture Meilin could understand. Ledgers filled with Ethan's careful handwriting, receipts for cattle sales that had never been recorded, transfer documents bearing signatures that looked almost right but weren't quite. She'd been staring at them for 2 hours, cross-referencing numbers, her mother's training in precise observation serving her now in ways that had nothing to do with medicine. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the winter sun climb over the mountains. He hadn't said much since Sheriff Morrison had left an hour ago, just stood there processing what they'd uncovered. It's systematic, Meilin said finally. Whoever did this knew your business well enough to make it look legitimate at first glance. But you caught it. Only because I was looking for discrepancies. You said 300 head of cattle were sold in September, but the bank only shows payment for 200. That's a significant gap. Ethan turned from the window, his face carved from stone. Someone's been skimming my profits for at least 6 months. That's why the ranch has been struggling. I thought I was just having bad luck, bad timing. Turns out someone's been stealing me blind. The knock on the door startled them both. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the rifle mounted above the fireplace before he recognized the voice calling out. Ethan? It's Sarah Mitchell. I've got news. He opened the door to find Sarah on the porch, her face flushed from riding hard, Daniel sitting behind her on the horse, looking much healthier than he had 2 months ago. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right for once. Sarah climbed down, helping her son after her. I just came from town. The council met last night about Dr. Hartwell's complaint against Miss Zhao. Meilin set down the ledger she'd been holding. And? They dismissed it. Every single member voted against him. Sarah's smile was fierce. Mrs. Harper spoke up first, told them how you saved Tommy when Hartwell's treatment failed. Then James Peterson talked about his back, how he can work again because of you. Then Mary Chen and the Walkers and at least 8 other people. By the time they were done, Hartwell looked like he'd been gut-punched. They voted to let me continue practicing. They voted that you have every right to help people who seek your services voluntarily, and that trying to prevent you would be against the public interest. Sarah pulled Daniel forward. Show her, honey. The boy held out a folded paper, carefully preserved. Meilin opened it to find a petition, dozens of signatures covering the page, all vouching for her skill and character, names of people she'd treated, people who'd witnessed her treatments, people who simply believed she deserved a chance. This is... Meilin's voice caught. This is extraordinary. No, what you've done is extraordinary. This is just people recognizing it. Sarah's expression softened. You helped my boy when no one else could. Half the people on that list have similar stories. We weren't about to let Hartwell run you out of town because he's too proud to admit someone else might know things he doesn't. After Sarah and Daniel left, Meilin stood holding the petition, reading each name carefully. Some she recognized immediately, patients she'd treated, families she'd helped. Others were strangers, people who'd signed based on what they'd heard, on faith that she deserved their support. You've made a place for yourself here, Ethan said quietly. Have I? These people don't sign petitions for outsiders. They sign them for neighbors. He picked up one of the ledgers, which makes what I'm about to ask even more important. She looked up. What? I need your help with something that goes beyond herbal remedies and sick children. I need you to help me prove who's been stealing from me, and I think I know who it is. He paused. But it's dangerous. Hale has resources, connections. If we come at him and miss, he'll bury us both. You think Victor Hale is behind the theft? I think someone with access to my business dealings and the ability to forge documents is behind it. That narrows the field considerably. Ethan spread out a map of the town. Hale owns the bank where I keep my accounts. He owns the freight company that transports my cattle. He has fingers in every business transaction that happens in this territory. And he's been pressuring me for months to sell him a portion of my land, specifically the section along the river. I kept refusing because that land's been in my family for 2 generations. So he manufactured a financial crisis to force your hand. That's what I think, but thinking it and proving it are different things. He looked at her directly. You've got a way of seeing details other people miss. You diagnosed Daniel Mitchell in 10 minutes when Hartwell had been treating him wrong for months. You caught discrepancies in these ledgers that I missed because I trusted the numbers. I need that skill now, but I need you to know what you're getting into. Meilin thought about Victor Hale's smooth voice, his veiled threats, the calculation in his eyes when she'd refused his offer. She thought about the petition in her hands, the community that had stood up for her, the life she was building in this place that had started as a destination built on lies, but had become something real. What do you need me to do? The next 3 days blurred together in intensive investigation. Meilin closed her practice temporarily, sending word through her patients that she'd be unavailable except for emergencies. She and Ethan worked from dawn until late into the night, going through every business transaction from the past year, comparing Ethan's records with bank statements, freight receipts, sale documents. The pattern emerged slowly but undeniably. Cattle sales reported to Ethan at fair market prices, but bank deposits showing amounts 30% lower. Freight charges that were higher on paper than what the freight company's own ledgers showed. Small discrepancies, individually explainable, but together forming a systematic scheme to siphon money while making Ethan appear to be failing as a rancher. He's been planning this for at least a year, Meilin said on the 3rd night, her eyes burning from reading by lamplight. Look at this progression. The first few months, the discrepancies are tiny, almost unnoticeable. Then they gradually increase as you get more comfortable with the losses, as you start to believe it's just bad luck. And all the while, he's been making offers to buy my land, positioning himself as the solution to my financial problems. Ethan's voice was tight with controlled anger. Catherine always said Hale was a snake. I should have listened. Knowing is one thing, proving it in a way that will hold up is another. Meilin pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. We need original documents from the bank and the freight company. We need to show that the numbers they gave you don't match their actual records. Hale owns both businesses. He's not going to hand over evidence of his own fraud. Then we need to find someone who works for him who might be willing to help. Someone who has access but also has a reason to want the truth exposed. Ethan thought for a moment. Margaret Brennan. She's a bookkeeper at the bank, has been for 20 years. Before Hale bought it, actually. She's old school, believes in honest accounting. If anyone's uncomfortable with what Hale's been doing, it would be her. The next morning, Ethan went to town alone. He returned 4 hours later with Margaret Brennan seated beside him in the wagon, a leather satchel clutched in her lap and fear written across her face. Inside the house, the older woman set the satchel on the table with shaking hands. I could lose my position for this. Worse than that, if Mr. Hale finds out. He won't, Ethan said firmly. What you're doing is right, Margaret. You know it is. Right doesn't always protect people from wrong. But she opened the satchel anyway, pulling out copies of bank ledgers. I've suspected something was off for months. The numbers never quite balanced the way they should, and when I asked Mr. Hale about it, he told me to mind my own business and do my job. But accounting is my job, and what he's been doing... She trailed off, shaking her head. Meilin spread the bank ledgers alongside Ethan's records. The discrepancies were stark when viewed side by side. Money recorded as deposited in Ethan's name, but actual deposits showing significantly less. Transfer fees that appeared on Ethan's statements, but not in the bank's internal records. He's been stealing from multiple accounts, Margaret said quietly. Not just yours, Mr. Cole, at least 6 other ranchers and business owners. Always people who opposed him on something, who didn't fall in line with his plans. He manufactures financial difficulties, then swoops in with offers to buy their land or businesses at a fraction of their worth. Do you have documentation of the other thefts? Some, not all. He's careful, and he's been at this for years. Margaret looked at Meilin. I heard you stood up to him. Refused his offer of partnership. That took courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. Margaret managed a weak smile. What are you planning to do with this evidence? Take it to Sheriff Morrison first, then to the territorial court if necessary. Ethan gathered the papers carefully. But I need your testimony, Margaret. Documents alone might not be enough. The woman's face paled. Mr. Hale will ruin me. He's already ruining this town. How many more people will lose their livelihoods, their homes, their futures before someone stands up to him? Margaret sat silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll testify, but I'll need protection. Once word gets out, Hale will come after me. You can stay here, Meilin offered. The spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. It's strategy. Ethan's ranch is defensible. It's away from town, and we can watch the approaches. You'll be safer here than anywhere else. That evening, with Margaret settled in the spare room and the evidence secured, Ethan and Meilin stood on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. The temperature had dropped, frost already forming on the grass, their breath visible in the cold air. This is going to get ugly, Ethan said. I know. Hale won't take this lying down. He has money, influence, people who owe him favors. When we make this public, he'll fight back with everything he has. What's the alternative? Let him continue stealing from you and others? Let him control this town through fraud and intimidation? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Catherine used to say that sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing, and the hardest thing is the only thing worth doing. Your wife was right. He looked at her then, really looked at her in the fading light. You didn't have to get involved in this. It's not your fight. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You treated me with dignity when you had every reason to turn me away. This town stood up for me when it would have been easier to side with Dr. Hartwell. She met his eyes. Maybe it wasn't my fight at first, but it is now. These people are my neighbors. This place is my home. That makes their problems my problems. Something shifted in his expression, something that had been carefully guarded beginning to thaw. When did you stop being a stranger? I don't know, but I'm not anymore, am I? No, you're not. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Ethan cleared his throat and looked away. We should get some rest. Tomorrow we take this to the sheriff. But sleep didn't come easily. Meilin lay in her bed listening to the house settle, to Margaret's nervous movements in the spare room, to Ethan pacing in the kitchen. She thought about the evidence they'd gathered, about what would happen when they revealed Hale's crimes. She thought about the petition with all those signatures, about the community that had claimed her as one of their own. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Meilin rose and went to the window, looking out at the landscape painted silver by moonlight. Montana in winter was harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and somehow sheltering, like the people who lived here, who'd carved out lives in a place that demanded everything and gave back only to those who earned it. She'd earned it, not through the false promises of love and partnership in those fraudulent letters, but through her own work, her own skills, her own stubborn refusal to break under circumstances that should have destroyed her. The door to her room opened slightly, and Ethan's voice came through the darkness. "You awake?" "Yes." "Can't sleep either?" "Too much to think about." He pushed the door open a bit wider, standing in the hallway with lamplight behind him. "I've been thinking about those letters, the ones that brought you here." "What about them?" "I've been trying to figure out who wrote them. Who knew enough about me to make them convincing, who had a reason to use my name, who benefited from you arriving here." Meilin hadn't thought much about the letters in weeks, too focused on building her practice and now on exposing Hale's fraud. But Ethan's question made her pause. "You think there's a connection?" "I think it's quite a coincidence that you arrived right when Hale was ramping up his pressure on me. You refused his offer, started building influence in town, became someone people respect and trust, someone who might notice things others miss, someone who might help me fight back." "You're saying someone wanted me here specifically to help you?" "I'm saying maybe those letters weren't just random fraud. Maybe someone was trying to bring in an ally I didn't know I needed." It was a wild theory, but something about it resonated. "Who would do that? Who would know you needed help, know about my skills, have the resources to orchestrate such an elaborate plan?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Ethan paused. "After we deal with Hale." The next morning, they rode to town together, Margaret seated between them, the evidence secured in a locked box. The sheriff's office was on the main street, a small building that also served as the town's only jail. Sheriff Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s, someone who'd seen enough of human nature to be skeptical but not cynical. He listened as Ethan laid out the evidence, his expression growing grimmer with each document. "This is serious, Ethan. You're accusing one of the most powerful men in the territory of systematic fraud." "I'm not accusing, I'm proving." Ethan gestured to the ledgers. "It's all there, documented and witnessed." "And you're willing to testify to all this?" Morrison asked Margaret. "I am." The sheriff studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll need to verify some of this with the other alleged victims, gather additional testimony. This isn't something I can move on overnight." "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. I need to build an airtight case before I bring charges. Hale will have expensive lawyers, and if there's any gap in the evidence, they'll drive a wagon through it." They left the sheriff's office knowing that the hardest part was still ahead, waiting while Morrison investigated, knowing that word would inevitably leak, that Hale would hear rumors and begin preparing his defense. It took 3 days. Meilin was in town purchasing supplies when she saw him, Victor Hale, standing outside his hotel, talking with 2 men she didn't recognize. He saw her at the same moment, and his expression shifted from pleasant business conversation to something cold and calculating. He crossed the street deliberately, the 2 men following like shadows. "Miss Zhao, how fortuitous to run into you." "Mr. Hale, I understand you've been quite busy lately. Closed your practice for a few days, I heard. Nothing wrong, I hope? Just personal matters." "Of course. Personal matters." His smile was reptilian. "I also heard that Margaret Brennan has been spending time at the Cole Ranch. Curious, given that she's one of my employees." "Mrs. Brennan is a friend visiting friends." "Is she? How interesting." He stepped closer, voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Let me be very clear with you, Miss Zhao. You've made some poor choices since arriving in our town, aligning yourself with the wrong people, involving yourself in matters that don't concern you. There's still time to correct those mistakes." "I don't believe I've made any mistakes." "No?" His eyes were flat, emotionless. "Then let me spell it out. Your medical practice exists at the town's pleasure. That pleasure can be withdrawn. Your residence at the Cole Ranch is based on Ethan's continued solvency. That solvency is more fragile than you might think. Your safety, your livelihood, your entire future here depends on forces you don't control." He leaned in. "But I control them. And I'm offering you one last chance to be smart." What exactly are you offering, Mr. Hale? Stop whatever investigation you and Ethan are conducting. Convince Margaret to return to her duties. Mind your own business. In exchange, I'll make sure you're able to continue your practice without interference. I might even invest in a proper clinic for you. Really establish you as a respected member of the community. Meilin looked at him for a long moment. This man who dealt in threats disguised as opportunities, who'd built his empire on other people's suffering. She thought about the petition in her room, about the people who'd stood up for her, about Margaret trembling as she handed over evidence that could destroy her career. Mr. Hale, I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I must decline. Again. His smile vanished. You're making a very serious mistake. Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make. Is it? He glanced at his two companions. You're a long way from San Francisco, Miss Zhao. A long way from anywhere, really. Accidents happen on the frontier, people disappear, buildings burn. Chinese women, especially those without families or connections, are particularly vulnerable. The threat was explicit now, the pleasant veneer completely stripped away. Are you threatening me, Mr. Hale? I'm explaining reality. What you do with that information is your choice. He tipped his hat in a mockery of courtesy. Think very carefully about your next move. You might not get another chance. He walked away, his companions following, leaving Meilin standing in the street with ice in her stomach and anger burning in her chest. She went directly to the sheriff's office. Morrison listened to her account, his face hardening. That was a direct threat. I could arrest him for that. Based on my word against his? He'll claim it was a misunderstanding, that I misinterpreted friendly advice. Probably. Morrison leaned back in his chair. But it tells us he knows we're investigating. Someone talked, or he's got sources. Either way, he's getting nervous. Nervous men make mistakes. Or desperate moves. That too. The sheriff's expression was grim. I'm going to send a deputy to watch the Cole Ranch, just as a precaution. And I'm accelerating my investigation. If Hale's willing to make threats this openly, he's more dangerous than I thought. Meilin rode back to the ranch, every shadow seeming threatening, every stranger on the road a potential danger. When she finally saw the house in the distance, Ethan already outside with his rifle, clearly having seen her approaching, relief flooded through her. What happened? He asked as she dismounted. She told him everything. His expression grew darker with each word. He threatened you directly. He did. Because of me. Because you're helping me. Because I chose to help you. There's a difference. She met his eyes. This isn't your fault, Ethan. Hale is responsible for his own actions. But you're in danger because I'm in danger because I live in a world where men like Victor Hale think they can control everything and everyone. Because I refuse to be controlled. That's not on you. Margaret appeared on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. What's going on? They filled her in. She listened with growing alarm. He'll come after all of us now, she said quietly. Once the legal proceedings start, he'll try to discredit us, intimidate us, maybe worse. Let him try. Ethan's voice was hard. Sheriff's sending a deputy to keep watch. We've got weapons, defensible ground, and the truth on our side. The truth doesn't always win. No, Meilin agreed, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting for it. That night, they prepared the ranch for potential trouble. Ethan checked all the weapons, ensured ammunition was accessible, planned sightlines and defensive positions. The deputy arrived at sunset, a young man named Sam Collins, who positioned himself in the barn with a good view of the approach road. Meilin made sure her medical supplies were organized and accessible, knowing that if violence came, there would likely be injuries that needed treating. She prepared bandages, sterilized instruments, mixed pain remedies. They ate dinner in tense silence, three people bound together by circumstance and choice, waiting for whatever storm was coming. It arrived at midnight. Meilin woke to the sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. She was dressed and out of her room in seconds. Finding Ethan already at the window with his rifle, Margaret crouched behind the heavy table they'd moved to block the door. How many? Meilin asked. At least 4. Maybe more. Ethan's voice was steady, controlled. Stay low. The riders pulled up in front of the house, torches lighting the yard with flickering orange light. A voice called out, rough and unfamiliar. Ethan Cole, we got business to discuss. Ethan moved to the door, rifle ready but not raised. State your business from where you are. Mr. Hale sent us with a message. He's willing to forget this whole misunderstanding, wipe the slate clean. All you gotta do is tell the sheriff you made a mistake, that your accounting was wrong, that there never was any theft. And if I don't, then we're authorized to collect what Mr. Hale considers his rightful property, starting with 600 head of cattle and the deed to this ranch. You're not authorized to collect anything. Get off my land. Wrong answer, Cole. One of the men threw his torch onto the barn roof. Flames caught immediately, dry wood igniting with terrifying speed. Deputy Collins burst out of the barn, firing his pistol at the riders. They scattered, returning fire, the night exploding into chaos. Ethan fired through the window, providing cover for Collins. Meilin grabbed the rifle she'd been taught to use over the past weeks, taking up position at the opposite window. She'd never shot at another human being before, had never imagined she would, but watching flames consume the barn where they'd stored winter feed, where Ethan kept the tools that made his ranch viable, anger overrode fear. She fired at the ground near one rider's horse, making it rear and dump its rider. Not to kill, but to disable, to create chaos among the attackers. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes, but felt eternal. Finally, the riders retreated, 3 men wounded, 1 horse down, and the barn fully engulfed in flames. Deputy Collins was hit in the shoulder, but alive. The riders disappeared into the darkness, leaving destruction in their wake. Ethan and the deputy tried to save the barn, but the fire was too far advanced. They managed to get the horses out, to salvage some tools, but the structure itself was lost, collapsing in a shower of sparks that lit up the Montana night. Meilin treated Collins's shoulder, extracting the bullet and stitching the wound with steady hands, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Margaret helped, holding bandages, boiling water, her face pale but determined. When the immediate crisis was over, when Collins was resting and the fire had burned down to smoldering embers, Ethan stood in the yard surveying the damage. Meilin joined him, both of them covered in soot and ash. He just declared war, Ethan said quietly. Yes. Still want to stay? She thought about running, about taking what money she'd saved and getting on a train to anywhere else. She thought about the letters that had brought her here, about the life she'd built, about the people who depended on her skills and trusted her character. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Are you? He looked at her, this woman who'd arrived as a stranger based on lies and stayed to become something he hadn't known he needed, partner, ally, friend. No, I'm seeing this through. Then we'll see it through together. The sun rose on the wreckage of the barn, painting the destruction in shades of gold and gray. But standing beside Ethan in the cold morning air, Meilin felt something stronger than fear, more durable than anger. She felt certainty. Whatever came next, whatever Hale threw at them, they would face it together. And somehow, that made all the difference. News of the barn burning spread through town faster than the flames themselves had consumed the structure. By noon the next day, a steady stream of wagons appeared on the road to the Cole ranch. Neighbors bringing lumber, tools, winter feed for the horses. Men Ethan had never spoken more than a dozen words to showed up with hammers and saws, ready to rebuild what Hale's men had destroyed. Sarah Mitchell arrived with her husband and Daniel, bringing food enough to feed an army. You stood up for us when no one else would, she told Meilin, gripping her hands tightly. Now we stand up for you. By the second day, the foundation for a new barn was already laid, the skeleton of walls beginning to rise. Ethan worked alongside his neighbors, and Meilin found herself providing endless coffee and bandaging minor injuries. Splinters, hammer-struck thumbs, one man who managed to step on a nail despite everyone's warnings to watch where they walked. Sheriff Morrison arrived on the 3rd day, his expression grim. He dismounted slowly, surveying the construction, the men working in quiet determination, before approaching Ethan. I've got witnesses who saw Hale's men ride out here that night. 3 of them have come forward, willing to testify. Problem is, Hale's claiming they were acting on their own initiative, that he never ordered any attack. Of course he is. Ethan set down the beam he'd been carrying. What about the evidence of fraud? That's stronger. I've talked to 4 other ranchers who've experienced the same discrepancies you documented. With Margaret's testimony and the bank records, we've got enough to bring formal charges. Morrison paused. But the territorial prosecutor wants more. He wants proof that Hale personally orchestrated everything, not just that his businesses were involved in fraud. So witnesses to the burning aren't enough, and documented theft isn't enough. What does he need, Hale's written confession? Something close to it, yeah. The sheriff's frustration was evident. Look, I know it's not fair, but Hale's got resources we don't. He's already retained 2 lawyers from back east, and they're good. They'll argue that any discrepancies were accounting errors, that the barn burning was unauthorized action by overzealous employees, that Hale himself is innocent of wrongdoing. Meilin had been listening from the porch. Now she stepped forward. What if we could get him to incriminate himself? Both men turned to look at her. How? Morrison asked. He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. What if someone approached him with an offer he couldn't refuse, something that would make him reveal his methods, his involvement, his guilt? You're talking about a trap, Ethan said slowly. I'm talking about giving him rope to hang himself with. Meilin looked between them. He approached me twice with offers of partnership. What if I went back to him, said I'd reconsidered, that I wanted to make a deal? Absolutely not. Ethan's response was immediate and sharp. It's too dangerous. It's the only way to get what Morrison needs. Then we'll find another way. There isn't another way, and you know it. Meilin kept her voice level despite the fear coiling in her stomach. He won't talk openly to the sheriff or to you, but he thinks I'm weak, that I can be bought or intimidated. He'll talk to me. Morrison was already shaking his head. Miss Zhao, I appreciate the offer, but Ethan's right. Hale is dangerous, especially now that he knows we're building a case against him. Sending you in there alone. Who said anything about alone? You could be nearby, listening. If he says anything incriminating, you'd have your evidence. And if he realizes what you're doing, if he decides to eliminate the threat you represent, then you arrest him for assault or worse. Either way, we'd have him. The 2 men exchanged a long look. Finally, Morrison spoke. I'd need the prosecutor's approval. I'd need at least 3 deputies positioned nearby, and at the first sign of danger, we pull you out, whether we have evidence or not. Agreed. Meilin. Ethan's voice was low, intense. You don't have to do this. We'll find another way. Will we? How many more barns will burn while we wait for another way? How many more people will Hale victimize? She met his eyes. I didn't come to Montana to hide from hard choices. Let me do this. What she didn't say, what hung in the air between them, was that she owed this place something. These people had given her a home when she had none, had stood up for her rights, had rebuilt Ethan's barn with their own hands because they believed in fairness and community. This was her chance to give something back. 3 days of preparation followed. Morrison coordinated with the territorial prosecutor, who reluctantly approved the plan. Deputies were briefed and positioned. Meilin rehearsed what she'd say, how she'd approach Hale, what questions would most likely elicit incriminating responses. The night before the meeting, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch, the new barn settling, horses moving in their stalls, wind in the pines. Tomorrow she'd walk into Victor Hale's office and deliberately provoke a man who'd already proven he was willing to use violence to protect his interests. A soft knock on her door. You awake? Yes. Ethan entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and sat in the chair by the window, his face shadowed in the lamplight. You don't have to do this, he said again. We've been through this. I know, I need to say it one more time. You don't owe me this. You don't owe this town anything. You could walk away right now and no one would blame you. Would you walk away if our positions were reversed? He smiled slightly. No. Then why do you think I would? Because you're smarter than me. Or just as stubborn. Meilin sipped her tea, gathering her thoughts. Ethan, those letters that brought me here, they promised partnership, building something together, facing difficulties side by side. They were lies, but somehow I ended up with those things anyway. Just not the way I expected. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm not doing this for obligation or debt. I'm doing it because this is my home now, and you're my... She paused, searching for the right word. You're my friend, and I protect what's mine. Something shifted in his expression, walls that had been carefully maintained beginning to crumble. Catherine died 3 years ago, and I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just work the ranch until I couldn't anymore, then sell it and disappear somewhere. I didn't plan on caring about anything again. And now? Now I'm terrified that something's going to happen to you tomorrow, and I won't be able to stop it." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Meilin set down her tea and moved to stand in front of him. "I'm scared too, but I'm also certain this is right, and I promise you, I'll be careful." He stood, and for a moment they were very close, close enough that she could see the worry in his eyes, the care he was trying so hard to keep controlled. His hand came up, hovering near her face, then dropped. "Come back safe." "I will." He left and Meilin returned to her bed, but sleep still wouldn't come. She thought about Catherine, the woman whose death had carved such a deep wound in Ethan. She thought about the life she'd left behind in San Francisco, the grinding poverty and loneliness that had made those fraudulent letters seem like salvation. She thought about the person she'd been when she stepped off that train months ago and the person she'd become. Tomorrow would either vindicate everything she'd built or destroy it entirely. There was no middle ground. Morning came cold and clear. Meilin dressed carefully, choosing her good blue dress, pinning her hair neatly. She looked respectable, professional, like someone who might genuinely be reconsidering a business partnership. The deputies were already positioned when she and Morrison rode into town, one in the building across from Hale's office, another in the alley beside it, a third watching the back exit. Morrison had a small room directly above Hale's office where he'd be listening through floorboards that conveniently had several gaps and cracks. "Last chance to back out," Morrison said. "I'm not backing out." "Then remember, keep him talking, get him to explain his methods, get him to brag about how clever he's been. Men like Hale love to talk about their own brilliance. Use that." Meilin nodded and walked to the building that housed Hale's office. The sign read, "Hale Enterprises, Victor Hale, Proprietor." She climbed the stairs and knocked. "Come in." Hale looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by his usual calculated smile. "Miss Zhao, this is unexpected." "Mr. Hale, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Always happy to speak with you. Please, sit." He gestured to a chair. "What brings you here today?" Meilin sat, folding her hands in her lap, projecting an image of nervous determination. "I've been thinking about your offer, the one you made several weeks ago regarding a partnership for my medical practice." His smile widened. "Have you now?" "Recent events have made me reconsider my position. The attack on the coal ranch, the difficulty of establishing a practice without proper facilities, the ongoing tension with Dr. Hartwell, it's become clear that I need support if I'm to succeed here." A wise realization. Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I'm pleased you've come to your senses. Before I agree to anything, I need to understand exactly what kind of partnership you're proposing. What would your involvement entail?" "Well, I'd provide space, a proper clinic in town, fully equipped. I'd handle the business aspects, the bookkeeping, patient scheduling. You'd focus on the medicine. Profits would be split, say 70-30 in my favor to account for my initial investment and ongoing management." 70-30 seems heavily weighted toward you. "I'm taking all the financial risk. Besides, 30% of a successful practice is worth more than 100% of a struggling one, wouldn't you say?" Meilin nodded as if considering. "And the bookkeeping, would that be similar to how you manage your other businesses, the bank, the freight company?" "Exactly the same. I have a very efficient system." "I've heard that your system is remarkably effective at maximizing profits." Something flickered in his eyes. Caution or pride, she couldn't tell. "I'm a businessman, Miss Zhao. Maximizing profits is rather the point." "Of course, I'm just curious about the methods. For instance, I understand that some of your business partners have experienced unexpected financial difficulties recently. Ranchers particularly seem to struggle with accounting discrepancies." "Are you implying something?" "Not at all. I'm simply observing that becoming your partner seems to have consequences. Sometimes profitable, sometimes less so. I want to know which category I'd fall into." Hale studied her for a long moment. "You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for." "All right, I'll be honest with you. Business on the frontier requires certain flexibilities. Sometimes the official numbers and the actual numbers don't align perfectly. Sometimes partnerships involve creative accounting. As long as everyone involved understands and benefits from these arrangements, there's no problem. And when people don't understand or benefit, then adjustments need to be made. Take Ethan Cole, for example. Stubborn man, refused every reasonable offer I made for his land, so I had to create circumstances that would make him more amenable to selling. By manipulating his accounts. By correcting inefficiencies in his business model. Hale's smile turned cold. He was losing money anyway. I just accelerated the process and positioned myself to benefit from the inevitable outcome. And the barn burning? Was that part of the corrective process? That was unfortunate. Some of my associates became overly enthusiastic in their efforts to encourage Cole's cooperation. I didn't specifically order violence, but I can't say I was surprised or disappointed when it occurred. Meilin fought to keep her expression neutral, to hide the revulsion and anger churning in her stomach. So if I become your partner, I should expect similar creative accounting and enthusiastic associates? Only if you become uncooperative. As long as you follow my guidance and don't ask too many questions, we'll have a very profitable relationship. He leaned forward. The key is understanding who holds the real power in this territory. It's not the sheriff, not the town council, and certainly not struggling ranchers or immigrant herbalists. It's men like me who control the money, the businesses, the flow of commerce. Align yourself with power, Miss Zhao, and you prosper. Fight against it, and you end up like coal, watching your livelihood burn. The room was silent for a moment. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy and official. The door burst open, and Sheriff Morrison strode in with 2 deputies behind him. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and criminal intimidation. Hale's face went from confident to furious in an instant. He looked at Meilin, understanding dawning. You recorded this conversation. Every word, Morrison confirmed. Miss Zhao, thank you for your assistance. You can go. Meilin stood on trembling legs and walked to the door. Behind her, she heard Hale's voice, no longer smooth, but venomous. This isn't over. I have lawyers, connections, resources you can't imagine. I'll be out by tomorrow, and when you are, you'll face a territorial judge who now has documented evidence of your crimes, multiple witness testimonies, and your own recorded confession, Morrison interrupted. You're done, Hale. Accept it. Outside, Meilin leaned against the building, breathing deeply, trying to stop her hands from shaking. The deputies who'd been positioned as backup appeared, congratulating her on her courage. Someone brought her water. Through it all, she kept waiting for Ethan to appear. He finally rode into town an hour later, having been kept at the ranch deliberately to prevent him from interfering. When he saw her standing safe and whole outside the sheriff's office, relief flooded his face. He dismounted and crossed to her in 3 long strides. You did it. We did it. No, you did it. You walked in there knowing what he was capable of and got him to confess everything. His voice was rough with emotion. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both? He laughed, a sound she'd rarely heard from him. And then he did something completely unexpected. He pulled her into a tight embrace right there on the main street of town with half the population watching. Meilin froze for just a moment, then relaxed into it, letting herself feel the solid reality of his presence, the proof that they'd both survived this. When they finally pulled apart, she saw tears in his eyes. I thought I'd lost you, he said quietly. You didn't. I'm right here. The trial took place 3 weeks later. By then, Morrison had built a case so comprehensive that Hale's expensive lawyers could only advise him to plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. The territorial judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison and ordered restitution to all his victims. The bank and freight company were sold to new owners who promised honest business practices. Margaret Brennan was offered a position as senior bookkeeper at substantially higher pay. The ranchers Hale had defrauded received settlements that allowed them to recover their losses. And slowly, quietly, life in town returned to normal. Except nothing was quite normal for Meilin. Her practice grew steadily, patients coming not just for illness, but for preventive care, wanting to learn about herbs and nutrition and the Eastern medical philosophy she practiced. Dr. Hartwell, humbled by the community's clear preference for having multiple medical options, eventually approached her about collaboration rather than competition. I don't know your methods, he admitted over coffee one afternoon, and I was wrong to dismiss them without learning. If you're willing to teach me some basics of herbal medicine, I'll share what I know about surgery and Western diagnostic techniques. It was as close to an apology as she'd get, and she accepted it gracefully. Winter deepened into the hardest months, when snow piled high and travel became difficult. Meilin found herself spending more time at the ranch, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She and Ethan had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, cooking together, talking by the fire, working side by side on ranch maintenance when weather permitted. The lines between employer and tenant, between allies and friends, had blurred so gradually that neither could say exactly when it happened. But somewhere between rebuilding the barn and surviving Hale's threats, between quiet evenings and shared coffee at dawn, something had shifted. One night in January, with snow falling thick outside and the fire burning low, Ethan finally spoke the words that had been building between them for months. "Those letters that brought you here, do you ever wish they'd been real?" Meilin looked up from the medical journal she'd been reading. "Real in what way?" "Real in that I actually wrote them. That you came here for me, not because of fraud." "I don't know. The letters promise things I'm not sure I even wanted. Partnership, yes, but also a kind of transaction. Practical arrangement devoid of deeper feeling. And what do you want now?" The question hung in the warm air. Meilin set down her journal and met his eyes. "Now I want something that wasn't in those letters at all. Something that can't be promised in advance or negotiated like a business deal. Something that has to be earned through time and truth, and choosing to stay even when leaving would be easier." Ethan crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair. "I don't have romantic words. I'm not good at this. But I know that when you walked into Hale's office to face danger for my sake, for this community's sake, I realized something. I don't want you here as a tenant, or an employee, or even just a friend. I want you here as my partner in the way those letters promised, but never delivered. Real partnership. Building a life together." "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you'd consider it. If somewhere in this mess of fraud and barn burnings and frontier justice, you might have found something worth staying for that has nothing to do with letters or obligations." Meilin felt tears prick her eyes. "I found it months ago. I just wasn't sure you had." "I'm slow, but I get there eventually." He took her hand. "Catherine was my first love, and losing her nearly destroyed me. I thought that was it, that I'd used up my allotment of happiness. But you came here through the worst circumstances, stayed through even worse ones, and somehow made me believe that starting over isn't betraying what I had before. It's honoring it by choosing to keep living fully. She would have wanted that for you. I think she would have liked you very much. You're both stubborn as hell." Meilin laughed through her tears. "Is that a proposal or an insult?" "It's the truth. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Will you stay not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you choose to be?" She thought about the train platform months ago, about opening those first fraudulent letters, about every choice and chance that had led to this moment. None of it had been planned. All of it had been necessary. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and certain, and Meilin felt something settle into place that she hadn't known was missing, the sense of being exactly where she belonged. They married in March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the mountains. It was a small ceremony at the ranch, with Sarah and her family, Margaret Brennan, Sheriff Morrison, and about 30 other townspeople in attendance. Dr. Hartwell performed the ceremony, having been ordained years ago and never mentioning it until Meilin asked if anyone in town could officiate. "I've married half the couples in this territory," he told her. "Might as well add you to the list." Meilin wore a simple dress that the women of town had helped her make, white with small embroidered flowers around the collar, a blend of Western tradition and Eastern artistry. Ethan wore his best suit and looked uncomfortable but happy. When the ceremony ended and they were pronounced married, the celebration that followed was loud and joyful. Food and music, dancing and laughter, a community coming together to celebrate two people who'd found each other through the most unlikely circumstances. Late in the evening, when most guests had left and only close friends remained, Sarah approached Meilin with a knowing smile. "I have something for you. Well, a confession, really." "What kind of confession?" Sarah pulled out a bundle of letters, the handwriting immediately recognizable. The 17 letters that had brought Meilin to Montana. You wrote them? Meilin stared at her friend in shock. Not alone. Margaret helped with some of the details about Ethan, making them realistic. We knew he needed help, but was too stubborn to ask for it. We also knew this town needed someone like you, someone who could see things clearly and wasn't afraid to challenge the way things had always been done. But how did you know about me? I didn't, not specifically. I placed advertisements in several cities looking for educated women interested in frontier life. You were the only one who responded with the kind of strength and skill we needed. Sarah gripped Meilin's hands. I know it was wrong, using Ethan's name without permission, deceiving you about the situation. But I also knew that if I told you the truth, that we were looking for someone to help our town fight corruption, and that you might end up in danger, you never would have come. You manipulated both of us. I did, and I won't apologize for it because look what happened. You helped expose Hale, you've built a thriving practice, and you and Ethan found each other. Sometimes the right outcome requires the wrong methods. Meilin should have been angry. By all rights, she should have felt betrayed again. But looking around at the life she'd built, at the man she'd just married, at the community that had become her family, she couldn't summon rage. You took an enormous risk. I know, but my son was dying, Ethan was being destroyed by Hale, and our town was rotting from corruption. I needed someone who could help, and I believed you were that person. Was I wrong? No, but you're never doing anything like this again. Sarah laughed. Deal. Besides, I'm retired from matchmaking. One success is enough for a lifetime. Later that night, after all the guests had gone and the ranch was quiet under a star-filled sky, Meilin and Ethan stood on the porch, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs together. Are you angry about the letters? Ethan asked, now that you know the truth. I don't know. I should be. But somehow it feels right. Sarah saw what was needed and made it happen, even if her methods were questionable. She's like you that way, stubborn and certain and willing to do what's necessary. Is that what you think of me? Among other things. He pulled her close. I think you're extraordinary. I think you saved this ranch, this town, and probably me. I think those fraudulent letters brought me something more real than any honest proposal ever could have. Meilin leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the certainty of this choice they'd both made. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd gotten back on that train the first day? If I'd given up and left? Every day. And every day I'm grateful you stayed. So am I. They stood together as night deepened, two people who'd found their way to each other through deception and danger, through community and courage, through the simple act of choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. The mountains stood dark against the stars, eternal and sheltering, and somewhere in the distance a wolf called, not a threat, but a song. Meilin thought about her mother, about the knowledge that had been passed down through generations, now being used to heal people in a place her mother had never imagined existed. She thought about the young woman who'd stepped off the train months ago with nothing but herbs and hope, and the woman she'd become, stronger, more certain, more herself than she'd ever been in San Francisco. The life promised in those letters had been a beautiful lie, but the life she'd built in their place was a beautiful truth. She'd come to Montana seeking a predetermined future and found instead something infinitely more valuable, the freedom to create her own. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. That I started this journey looking for someone to rescue me and ended it discovering I could rescue myself, and that along the way I found a partner who doesn't need rescuing but chooses to stand beside me anyway. That's what partnership means. What those letters should have said from the beginning. Maybe. Or maybe we needed to learn it ourselves, the hard way. The hard way seems to be our specialty. She smiled. Then we're perfectly matched. Spring came fully alive in the weeks that followed, turning the Montana landscape into something almost impossible to believe. Wildflowers carpeting the meadows, aspens leafing out in brilliant green, snowmelt filling the creeks with rushing water. The new barn stood sturdy and complete, better built than the original. The ranch thrived, cattle healthy and multiplying, hayfields promising good harvest. Meilin's practice expanded into a small clinic in town, a space Dr. Hartwell helped her secure. They worked in genuine collaboration now, referring patients to each other based on which approach would serve best. sometimes consulting together on difficult cases. The old doctor had even begun learning Chinese herbalism, his curiosity overcoming his earlier prejudice. One warm afternoon in May, Meilin was in the clinic when Sarah arrived with news that made her laugh out loud. Victor Hale tried to bribe a guard to help him escape. The guard reported it immediately. They've added another 5 years to his sentence. Some people never learn. No, they don't. Sarah settled into a chair. But some people do. I heard Dr. Hartwell singing your praises at the town council meeting. Said your methods complement his beautifully, and the town is better served by having both approaches available. He's been surprisingly gracious. He's been humbled, which is good for everyone. Pride makes terrible medicine. Sarah paused. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask, are you happy? Truly happy? No regrets about how everything happened? Meilin considered the question seriously. I regret the deception, the fear, the violence, but I don't regret the outcome. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best destinations. That evening, Meilin rode back to the ranch to find Ethan working in the new garden they'd planted together. Vegetables and herbs, a blend of what he'd always grown and plants she'd introduced. He looked up as she approached, dirt on his hands and satisfaction on his face. Good day? Very good. You? Excellent. Cattle prices are up. We've got 3 new calves, and I finally got that irrigation channel working properly. He gestured to the garden. Your ginger root is sprouting. Is it? She dismounted and crouched beside the small green shoots. My mother would be pleased. She always said ginger was stubborn, like the people who use it. Then it'll do well here. This is stubborn country for stubborn people. They worked side by side until sunset, planting and weeding and planning future expansions. When the light began to fail, they went inside to the house that was no longer his or hers but theirs, filled now with both their belongings, both their histories, both their hopes. Over dinner, Ethan raised a subject they'd been carefully avoiding. I've been thinking about children. Meilin set down her fork. Have you? Catherine and I never had any. We wanted to, but it never happened. I always thought that was the end of that particular dream. He met her eyes, but maybe it wasn't. If you want children, I do, eventually. When we're ready, then we'll work toward ready. His smile was soft, genuine. I liked the idea of this house filled with more than just us, of teaching someone to ride, to work the land, to value what matters. And I'll teach them about herbs and healing, about perseverance and strength. They'll be formidable, just like their parents. The summer passed in a blur of work and growth and quiet happiness. Meilin's reputation continued to expand, people traveling from neighboring towns to seek her treatment. She trained 2 young women as apprentices, passing on her mother's knowledge the way it had been passed to her. The cycle continuing, the wisdom surviving. In August, she discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan on a morning when the sun was painting everything gold, when the air smelled of hay and wildflowers and promise. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her close with trembling hands. Are you sure? I'm sure. When? Early spring, I think. March or April. He laughed, the sound filled with wonder and joy and something like awe. A spring baby, born when everything's coming back to life. Fitting, isn't it? That night they sat on the porch as they did most evenings, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. Ethan's hand rested on her stomach, still flat but holding their future. I keep thinking about those letters, he said, about how they promised partnership and building something together. Whoever wrote them, Sarah, I guess. They couldn't have known how literally those promises would come true. Maybe she did. Maybe she saw possibilities we couldn't see ourselves. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you came here, Meilin. Even under false pretenses, even through all the hardship, I'm glad every day that you stepped off that train and decided to stay. So am I. This place gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. What's that? Home. Not just a place to live, but a place to belong. People who see me as I am and value me for it. Work that matters. A partner who chooses me every day. I do choose you. Every day. Every moment. She leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his presence, the certainty of this life they were building together. In the distance, the first stars were appearing, and somewhere a coyote sang its evening song. Meilin thought about the journey that had brought her here, across an ocean, across a continent, across barriers of language and culture and expectation. She thought about her mother's herbs, now growing in Montana soil. She thought about the woman who'd written those fraudulent letters, gambling that bringing together the right people under desperate circumstances might create something extraordinary. It had worked. Against all odds, through deception and danger and sheer stubborn determination, it had worked. She'd come to Montana expecting a predetermined future based on careful letters and practical arrangement. What she'd found instead was something infinitely more valuable: the freedom to create her own destiny, the strength to fight for what mattered, and the wisdom to recognize love when it grew slowly from shared purpose and mutual respect. The letters had lied about the beginning, but they told the truth about the ending. Partnership. Building something together. Facing the frontier side by side. All of it had come true, just not the way anyone had planned. And that, Meilin thought, as winter's first snow began to fall months later, as her pregnancy became visible, and her child grew strong within her, was perhaps the most beautiful truth of all. The best things in life couldn't be planned or predicted or promised in advance. They could only be earned through courage and built through choice and recognized when they appeared wearing unexpected faces. She'd come to Montana by accident. She'd stayed by choice. And in staying, she'd found everything those false letters had promised and so much more besides. The ranch thrived. The town prospered. Her practice grew. Her child kicked and turned, eager to enter the world. And beside her, every day stood a man who'd been a stranger, become a friend, transformed into a partner, and finally revealed himself as the love she'd stopped believing existed. Spring came again, as it always did, turning the harsh Montana winter into something gentle and green and full of promise. And on a morning when the mountains were still white, but the valleys were blooming, Meilin gave birth to a daughter with her mother's delicate features and her father's steady gaze. They named her Catherine Grace, honoring the past, embracing the present, and offering hope for the future. And as Meilin held her daughter for the first time, as Ethan's arms wrapped around them both, she finally understood what those fraudulent letters had been trying to say all along. Home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built with your own hands, your own courage. Your own choice to stay when leaving would be easier. She'd built it here, in Montana, with a man who'd started as a stranger and become her everything, in a community that had claimed her as their own, through work that mattered, and love that had grown quietly, steadily, real. And that was worth more than any honest proposal ever could have been.